morning, everybody, and welcome to the Nags Head Planning Board meeting Tuesday, October 17th. Our first item of business will be to approve our agenda for the day.
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Please, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great, moving on to public comment and audience response. I see some people, but I think they're here for specific items. If there's nobody here for public comment, then we'll move on from that section to the approval of our minutes, the minutes from our September 19th Planning Board meeting.
Can I make a motion to approve them?
Please, we have a motion
Second.
and a second to accept the minutes as submitted. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Moving on then to our action items. The first item will be the consideration of a subdivision waiver. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning. So this request, it's a preliminary plat for minor subdivision titled Makita Subdivision. It's a 3.66 acre property. It's currently zoned R2 medium residential. You've got a copy of the plat up on the screen. This is South Old Oregon Inlet Road here. There's not an address for the property, so we gave you the parcel and PIN number in case you wanted to pull it up. The first little part of the staff report basically goes into the staff review process as to how this got in front of the planning board. So when this originally came in, we looked at it in terms of, is this an exempt subdivision, minor subdivision, major subdivision? And based upon the, is everybody okay up there? Is there an issue? I see.
We're not able to get on, I'm sorry.
We're not, yeah,
I
So
don't,
not
everybody-
connected to our,
I don't
not
know what we
connected to
do
our
here.
items.
But I password is
But Molly is.
always the same.
okay, okay.
You see us all floundering?
You go in there as
Well,
Nags
it's
Head
like,
Administrator?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, the commissioner.
Oh, we go in the Nags Head Commission.
We have to do
Okay.
this, Lily has us all up and running.
NH.
Yeah, okay, that's
POC. Thank you. Those are caps.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go to Google.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Apparently, all
And
the
then-
laptops were
Yeah.
booted last night after I got some all set up.
Oh, that's fun. Sorry. Things happen.
Go down.
Okay, good.
The agenda.
Everybody good?
Yep, right there. Oops, sorry about that. So,
Okay,
as I was saying, so wanted to figure out, is this an exempt subdivision, minor subdivision, major subdivision? And when you look at the definition of minor subdivision, you realize that what's being proposed, large 3.66 acre tract being subdivided into 2 lots, is going to fall under what we would consider a minor subdivision. And the definition for that is, it's in your packet. And so we went to section 4.1, which provides us the table of the review process for a minor subdivision. And it tells you that the preliminary plat would be reviewed by our technical review committee in-house. And then once the final plat is completed, then that's something that we could approve administratively. So the UDO administrator would be able to take care of that, and it would never have to come to the board. But that only applies if all the sections of, or all the requirements for subdivision have been met. And in this case, there was one section of the town code that could not be met. And that was section 10.47, limiting access to US 158, 64, 264, NC 12, and State Road 1243. That section states that access to any of these roadways from any new lot in a new residential subdivision of land or any recombination of existing residential lots is prohibited unless and except a variance or waiver is granted pursuant to the UDO. Access to any of the above major streets shall be provided by another existing improved public street accepted for maintenance by the town unless otherwise a waiver is granted to provide access. So I wanted to show this plat to you just briefly. This is the one that was submitted yesterday where they went ahead and addressed some of the conditions. So as you were working through the staff report and you saw a condition about easements being required, they've since done that. You can see where the easements are now shown along the perimeters of each of these proposed lots 1 and lot 2. I was remiss. This is lot 1 where the cursor is now. The property owners, the Makitas, are currently developing a single-family dwelling in this location. This proposal would be to create this lot number 2, the second sort of L-shaped lot here. So they have gone ahead and shown the easements for both lot 1 and lot 2. So now I want to go back to the staff report where we have our other attachments that we can look at as we go through this item. So this is just the staff report that's hitting on everything that we just discussed. So when an applicant is seeking a waiver from the subdivision ordinance, there's a specific section that speaks to this. And that's going to be section 4.28.1, waivers generally. I'll try to get this a little bigger. Oops. That states that where the planning board finds that due to special circumstances of a particular plat, the provision of certain required improvements is not requisite in the interest of public health, safety, general welfare, or is inappropriate because of adequacy or lack of connecting facilities adjacent or in proximity to the proposed subdivision, it may recommend and the Board of Commissioners may waive such requirements subject to appropriate conditions. Any decision of the Board of Commissioners must be rendered by a simple majority of those members present. And it must follow the procedures for a quasi-judicial hearing. It says in granting such waivers, the Planning Board may recommend and the Board of Commissioners may require such conditions as will, in its judgment, secure substantially the objectives and standards of the requirements being varied or waived. So I would like to hopefully get you down to the proposed development plat, which will lend more guidance as to why this is being requested. Okay, here we go. Oop, it's the next one down. As you all have noticed, both of these lots have a significant amount of wetlands on them, and that's going to play into the request for the waiver. They've provided their information from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in terms of their assessment and the likelihood of the ability to do some filling on Lot 2 should the waiver be granted and subsequently Lot 2 be created. So that was just the additional information that they provided for Planning Board's consideration there. Here we go. Okay, this is the most telling piece of information. So as you can see here, this is just feasibility plat. This is not the preliminary plat necessarily. It just has the proposed improvements. You can see This is the existing single-family dwelling that's being constructed on Lot 1 now. You can see that they have their cut onto State Road 243 or Old Oregon Inlet 1243 or Old Oregon Inlet Road. If you pan over, you can see how proposed lot number 2 would be developed. It would be an access here, again, another access onto South Old Oregon Inlet Road, hugging this property line and coming up to a proposed single-family dwelling. This is not their development permit application. So wanted to make that clear. This was more so just visually, so everybody could understand the proposal. When and if this lot is created and they actually come in to develop, you know, this house could potentially shift further into this area to be more so out of the wetland area and not impacting as many wetlands. But this was more just for visual purposes for the planning board and for the purpose of the health department evaluating the soils for the septic. So as you can see, the proposed single-family dwelling would be in this area where there's some uplands. And if we pan over, there's more uplands over here, significantly far away from the home. So that's their septic, that would be pumped over to this area of wetlands. So a lot of efforts are being made to utilize the uplands as best as possible and fill as little wetlands as necessary to achieve the proposed development on Lot 2. So again, the waiver that's being requested is access onto South Old Oregon Inlet Road via this driveway cut. To not have to seek this waiver, they could have considered a shared driveway scenario. But when you look at where this lot is, trying to create some branch of driveway over into Lot 2 would have obviously impacted more wetlands than necessary. So that's the genesis for the request being made today. The rest of the staff report, generally, like I said, once a waiver was required, it kicked it into this elevated process. Otherwise, you would have never seen it. So since it has been kicked into this quasi-judicial process, we needed to review the preliminary plat materials. And so the remainder of the staff report is just going through the requirements for preliminary plat. I won't go into each and every section. When it went through our technical review committee, there was a note made that there needed to be more topographic information so that we could better understand the drainage on the site. The applicants, Brian Rubino, Christiana Tampone, they're aware of that. They've stated that if this subdivision is created and they are able to develop Lot 2, they'll do a full topographic plat for this, delineating the water flow and also addressing stormwater management at the same time. So you noted in there, probably there was also an additional condition that says you can't direct your stormwater directly into wetlands. You're going to have some type of passive feature in between. They've acknowledged that. They're certainly willing to do that if the subdivision can be created. Like we noted, the location of the utility easements, that's been taken care of. And just an additional note in here that should the waiver be granted and the preliminary plat move forward, all the they'll need to reference section 10.52 to ensure they've met all the requirements of their final plat as well. I've provided some information on policy considerations. So this is our comprehensive land use plan, puts this property in a residential zoning district. And page 3-226 notes that the intent of the residential designation is to accommodate low density, single family residential, which In the R2, the minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet. Each of these lots are well over 1 acre. Granted, the majority of them is wetlands. They certainly meet all the setbacks, lot width, everything of that nature. So they're meeting all the requirements of the code. It would be considered low-density, single-family development. So we do find that the request for the waiver, it is consistent with those requirements that we talked about for waivers generally. We also find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And we did just ask that if you consider granting the waiver, that you also consider the conditions that we had in there, 1 through 4. Again, 1 talks about the utility easements, which have already been provided, so we can remove that if we process this forward to the Board of Commissioners. Should the application proceed forward towards individual development, we'll need additional topography and grade elevations on the site. And again, if future residential stormwater, if future residential permitting for lot number 2, we're going to need to make sure that there's no direct discharge of runoff into the proposed, into the 404 wetlands. And they have some type of passive stormwater measures in between the home and the actual wetlands themselves. So that's all I have for you today. Like I said, we have Brian Rubino, Christiana Tambone from Quibble available. They submitted this packet and happy to answer any questions that you have. Apologize, it was a huge staff report and a lot of information, but all it was really about at this point was seeking the waiver for access. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Anybody have questions for Kelly?
Is there, when it comes to the future, and this is not specifically, but only for this, if filling of wetlands is, what's the progression there? How does it work? You can't directly fill a wetland, but can you modify the wetland so that it becomes a pond and then move from there? Is there any kind of, how locked in amber is the topography?
I mean, in terms of Army Corps of Engineer requirements, is that what you're asking in terms of filling?
Yeah, so you can't directly fill a wetland, correct? I guess that's 1.
Yes.
2, can you modify the wetland so that you create a depression, it becomes a pond?
I would defer to Brian Rubino on that one.
Okay, should.
Ellen? And I don't think, you're just curious. It's not what's before us today?
But no, here's where it gets interesting. You can do that, is that correct?
With a permit.
With a permit.
Yeah.
Can you then fill that pond with a permit?
You wouldn't fall under the nationwide permit procedure.
Mhm.
So there's a set of permits.
Brian, would you mind stepping up
Sure,
for us? Thank you. Brian Rubino?
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, you're fine.
You're kind of.
Thank you, Kelly. No, it's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Brian Rubino with Quibble. So if the question is, can you dig a pond in Section 404 wetlands, you would need a permit from the Army Corps, and you also need a certification from Division of Water Resources at the state level, a 401 water quality certification. So there is a procedure for being able to dig a pond in 404 wetlands with the appropriate permit. But if the question is, can you come in and fill that pond? The answer is maybe, maybe not. So you would also need a permit for that. But since if you dug a pond in 404 wetlands, then that pond surface is considered adjacent to wetlands. So that pond is now a wetland. It's not just a backyard pond.
Right.
So unless you can walk around the perimeter of it on uplands, then it's a jurisdictional feature. So if you filled it, that would take a special permit, and you would have to go beyond the traditional easy permits from the Army Corps, which are called the nationwide permits. You'd have to go for an individual permit. They look at those on case-by-case basis, and certainly they require mitigation. But so the answer is you might be able to do that, but it's a pretty
Usually not.
extensive process.
If time is drawn out and, you know, it is, so this is one of the concerns that I have, thank you, for the explanation. This is one of the concerns I have with wetlands, is that you can, even using vegetation, plantings within a wetland, you can kind of create an upland area over time, you know, and modify the environment and
Dry it up.
this is, dry it out and then fill it. So, you know, this is, you know, some version of that. And it's a concern I have mostly in the area because it's so profoundly low as it is. All it would take is a storm event on top of that and it's all wet again. So this is, I'm concerned about not necessarily this situation, but other situations like it where that progression is created over time.
Do you think that's probable or
I
just
know,
possible?
it's happened. It's happened in other, maybe not in this jurisdiction. I know of other places that it's happened. I know of other developers who have done this. They have gotten the permitting for when you create the pond, you create a depression. You put the spoil on the side. That's after some significant period of time becomes an upland. You reevaluate it. It is now no longer considered a wetland. You can then fill that. And what my hope is that if we do this, and I don't have any problem with what we're seeing today, that it be understood that this was the desired intent of it, and further modifications or increase of fill on top of it is to me is a concern, because the general area that we're talking about is profoundly wet, you know, and so this goes back to Kelly at this point. In this area, how much of the time is the ditch near the road full of water?
I can't answer that.
Is it common that it has? Okay, so that's kind of where it's pretty wet as it is. I don't really have any problem with what we see today, but if we create this modification, we may have others like this.
Well, yeah, we're not creating that modification though, right? We're just looking at the subdivision waiver.
Yeah,
I
but.
mean, but I hear what you're saying. I
Well,
understand
yeah,
what you're saying.
We're creating
And it's-
a modification that allows for a precedent, and I just think we need to be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting that if that pond were to be filled in and become dry,
Mhm.
are you suggesting that there may be some development in that?
You know, should in future in situations like this have deed restrictions on the area so that fill is frowned upon.
Okay.
Frowned upon.
You know, I'm throwing everything I can against the refrigerator. I do know of areas where this has happened, places where this has happened in this area, where this progression has taken place, where you're talking over tens of years of time, which is everything for development, but is nothing for the homeowner. That's several administrations, and you go back, and because of plantings and a concerted effort, you can do this. This is not beyond doable.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yet, where we're talking about, everything's pretty low, pretty wet.
But you are saying you don't have a problem with this particular
No,
submission?
No,
I
I'm
mean,
just generally thinking.
this
if we-
waiver today, yeah.
If we do this, we need to possibly look at this, yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a march, but this is, I could speak of my knowledge of this, but I won't do that on the record.
Okay. All right.
A question, how much wetland are you actually filling for your driveway, for the house and all that stuff? How much are you actually filling?
It'll
I didn't
be
see it.
about 5,000 square feet.
5,000?
Yes.
Is that an exemption from the 404? I mean, is it like
That's
a tenth of an acre or something like that?
correct. So there's a permit for house footprints and there's a permit for driveways. We got a permit for lot 1 where you see that shaded area where they're building the house now. A portion of the house needed to have a little bit of wetlands fill. So we've been working with the Army Corps, and under the same permit, we're gonna modify that permit to fill for the new home site, assuming that the subdivision is approved. And so I'd say that because the other option would be that you could do a whole separate permit and have 1/10 of an acre for your house footprint, 10th of an acre for your driveway. But rather than do that, we did that for lot 1. We're gonna use those same permits, and you stay under that one threshold and do lot 2. We've kind of designed it like that and worked through the Corps to make sure that that was okay. And that was actually, that's their preference, because it's, you know, you're filling less wetlands.
Right.
Also, I was wondering, you know, for Lot 2, in the northwest portion of the lot, I guess, I was wondering, where is the repair area for the septic system? I mean, it's like, you have to have an area, a field that's basically going to support the house. So it's like, where might that be located on Lot 2?
So it's adjacent to the active system. There's a much smaller area. So the repair area, in this case, like we do on a lot of different lots all over the Outer Banks, is repair area is designed for an engineered, like, peat module type system. So much smaller, much more expensive to build. But that's only if, you know, that system fails, you know, the health department needs to make sure that there is a repair area available.
Can you tell me what your lot coverage is? I mean, for Lot 2, I mean, I'm more interested in, because I thought we exempted, I don't know, wetlands were considered for lot coverage, only high ground, I think, is considered. So I'm wondering what your lot coverage is for Lot 2.
So lot 2 is, so we don't have the coverages on there, and like as Kelly explained, this was kind of a conceptual diagram, so they're gonna design a house that's a little more specific than that, but it's gonna be less than 10% of the lot for sure. And I believe, Kelly, if I'm not mistaken, that 404 wetlands can be included in the coverage calculation, as long as it's not coastal camo wetlands.
Yeah, that is correct. And you can have 33% lot coverage, so. But again, this is not to approve
Right.
building permit.
Right.
I understand. I'm just looking, I'm more looking not at the particular site, but I'm looking at our rules governing the filling of wetlands. I mean, I know the Army, I mean, I know that, you know, they're federally protected, but I'm wondering if the town should acknowledge, I guess, the amount of wetlands that can be filled under a proposal such as this, that's all. I mean, the plan looks like it's going to be fine. I mean, I'm okay with the plan. It's just that I'm wondering about the rules, that our rules are governing, you know, the filling of wetlands, that's all, and how we look at that.
Okay, it sounds like we have some things we might could talk about in the future, you know, separate from today's discussion about the waiver. Yes, Mead?
I'd like to make a motion we approve.
Okay. We have a motion to approve the waiver?
Yes.
And a second? Any further discussion? Questions, anything like that? Okay, great. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Perfect. Thank you, Mead, and everyone. Thank you, Brian. Christiana, thank you for being here. Okay, moving on to consideration of text amendments to the UDO as it pertains to including the use of restaurant drive-through as a permissible use within the commercial mixed-use developments.
Okay, so
Signalized entrance. So that's the only thing.
I won't belabor this one too much. I think we've reviewed it a handful of times. The staff report is fairly unchanged. We're still of the opinion that that drive-through restaurant was specifically not included for mixed-use developments because of the potential for traffic impacts, congestion, emergency vehicle access quandaries, and things of that nature. I've outlined that in the staff report, but to be quite honest with you, the staff report is not terribly unchanged from the previous 2 times that you've seen it. let me scroll down to the actual request. So here's the language that's being proposed. It would be that the conditions for drive-through restaurants be amended to state that a drive-through restaurant must be situated in a retail shopping center development, which A, consists of at least 20 acres of land with frontage on US 158 right-of-way. B, the signalized access to and from US 150, has a signalized access to and from US 158. And C, the structure with a drive-through is less than 3,000 square feet. And then it goes on to state that the town board may in its discretion approve an alternative site layout with the front of the drive-through restaurant located in the C2 General Commercial District on US 158 being oriented differently, i.e. the front facade not facing US 158 as part of a special use permit. Moving down, where the front facade of the restaurant with the drive-through is not oriented towards US 158, the town board may approve such alternative site layout, provided that the buffer yard requirements are being met. So again, these are the same policy considerations that you've seen in the past. I won't, again, go into each of them. If there's specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. Here's the excerpts from our comprehensive land use plan where we talk about character areas, whalebone character area, which text amendments are not site specific, but I think we all realized from previous communication that this is in an effort to locate a Starbucks drive-through restaurant at the outlet's Nags Head. So that is part of the whalebone character area. We also have appropriate land uses in the corridors character area. As you can see here, US 158, US 64. We say that restaurants are appropriate uses, walk-up restaurants, sit-down restaurants, no drive-through restaurants as part of the corridor character area. That's the extent. Like I said, staff report isn't changed. We still recommend denial. One other aspect that is being requested that I didn't hit upon is, and this isn't new, but I'll call it out, is that section 7.32, which is where we actually tell you what uses can be in a mixed use development, such as a shopping center. The proposal here would be to add restaurant drive-through. So we allow neighborhood restaurants, sit-down restaurants, takeout restaurants. The request is to allow drive-through restaurants. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I believe Kraus Gray is here on behalf of Outlets Nags Head, who is the applicant for this.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
Sure.
Anybody have questions for Kelly? Anybody have questions for Mr. Gray, or did you want to speak to us, sir?
If I might, ma'am.
Please.
As indicated, my name is Kraus Gray, and I'm representing the applicant in this particular matter. May I pass something out?
Surely.
Thank you.
I'm coming in a little bit later into this matter because I know it's been before you a couple of times, and to be candid, I wasn't here, so I don't know exactly what happened. So I'm here to speak with you about what is being proposed at this particular point in time. And yes, this is for, hopefully, if it ultimately gets approved, to put a Starbucks with a drive-through at the outlet mall. And I have to agree totally with Kelly. You need to know that, and you need to understand the complexities of that when you make a decision concerning any type of change in your ordinances. Couple of quick points. One, your ordinances do allow a drive-through. You have it specifically in the C2. The town could have prohibited it everywhere. You have 6.5.3, where you have specific prohibitions where you say, these are not allowed anywhere within the town. And the town chose not to do that. Therefore, under special use permits, you do allow it. What we've done is given you some language and asked that you pass it on with approval to the commissioners, which limits the area within which this drive-through can be. If you read through the conditions where we say 20 acres, shopping center, there is no other area that we're aware of, and certainly Kelly can tell you differently if I'm telling you anything that's inaccurate, in the town that would meet the requirements that we're putting in. So we're limiting by our language the specific area of where this could be, frankly, to the property that my client has. We all know that coffee shops are allowed. In fact, they're allowed in most every one of your commercial zones. What makes this different, obviously, is the drive-through. And when I was looking at the policies, and I saw the policies that Ms. Wyatt had put in, and I looked and found, and I passed you a thing about some additional policies that I want to bring to your attention. Policy number LU-5, promote contiguous and cohesive nodes of commercial development of appropriate size, massing of the surrounding areas. Think about what we're proposing to you. We're proposing to add a Starbucks. We can't say that. We're proposing some language at this stage, but we all know that's what we're ultimately trying to get to, in an already existing commercial facility. I'm going to talk about the other concerns that staff has in just a second, but I want you to understand what we're trying to do meets that rubric perfectly. We're trying to put something where you already have commercial facilities. Looking at LU-9, which is on the next page. Encourage land uses that serve the needs of both year-round and seasonal residents in support of the town's overall vision for the community. And I have to admit, I didn't bring my reading glasses, so if I misread some of this, I truly apologize to everyone. Should have done that. We all recognize that unfortunately, some of us are addicted to coffee. I am. I'm the first to admit it. And having a coffee shop that allows both residentials, the year-round parties, as well as the tourists that come here, is a benefit to this community. On the next page, utilize on-site wastewater systems as the preferred method of wastewater treatment as long as they remain viable to effectively treat effluent and protect water quality. Our particular site has its own wastewater system. We're not adding a septic tank and putting new effluent into the ground. We have our own existing facility. And on the next page, this is one that Ms. Wyatt referenced, require sufficient parking for commercial businesses with parking areas, design regulations that limit impacts on neighbors and surrounding land use. And I want to focus a little bit on LU-23C, establish maximum limits on the number of parking spaces for each land use. Not minimums, maximums. And the whole point of that is We already have a parking area. Yes, we would be changing that parking area by the site plan, and that has to come back before the staff, and it has to come back before you, and it has to go back to the commissioners. But without the text amendment, we don't get even there. My point simply being that I think there's other provisions within your policy and action matrix which mitigates toward what my client is looking to do on this particular property. I know this project's been before this board a couple of different times, and I know that the original site plan, staff had significant concerns regarding. They did. And I'm not going to tell you that those concerns were not warranted. Frankly, they were. But I will tell you that the total concept of where this is going to be, if it's allowed, has now changed. It's now going to be in the same location. We listened to staff and have changed the amount of parking spaces that are now going to be deleted. The location of this facility will now be totally on the north side, so it's no longer having the blockage that was concerned about. But those are other things. Those are not today's issues. Today's issues is the language that we are requesting you to approve and submit to the commissioners for approval is to allow us then to come back to staff and say, okay, we listened to you. Here's a revised site plan, here's the concerns that you raised, and here's how we have addressed those concerns. I think this really boils down to a simple concept, in all candor. Given the things that I have noted to you about your policies and action matrix, is this the kind of development, Starbucks, in that particular area, if it can meet your other requirements that staff is going to put on us, and rightfully so, then we would respectfully request that you would allow the adoption of this and pass on to the commissioners that you would recommend approval of this language change to your ordinance. We still have to come back, and if we don't make it, we don't make it. I mean, that's the other part of it. If we come back with a plan that staff never approves, then they never approve it. We still, but at least I think it's at this stage, we've shown you where this plan, this language limits it so significantly that you're not opening some major door, and that's what I always hear from commissioners as well as planning staff. Are we opening a big door? And the answer to that is no. This is very narrow, and we would respectfully request that you vote to approve. And I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Like you, I have gone to Starbucks many times, and I would say most of the Starbucks that I've gone to are located within the mall, in a shopping center. It's not a freestanding drive-through. Why could you not consider a Starbucks in one of the, in the mall itself without creating a drive-through restaurant? It would seem to me it would be a lot less expensive.
That's being driven more by Starbucks than it is by anybody else, sir. In all candor.
Yeah,
Starbucks wants the drive-through. That's becoming more their model from what we understand. Now, I'm not the developer here.
Understand.
I'm simply parroting information that I have received, and I've learned a long time ago, just because somebody tells me something and then I tell you, don't hold me liable if in fact it turns out not to be accurate. But that's what I understand. Starbucks is the driving force because their model now moves more toward, because they have found that puts people through a lot faster. When people have to stop, get out of their car, go in, as compared to going through the board and telling what they want, it actually moves a lot quicker through the process. And again, I'm not going to assert to you that's an actual statement.
And my second question is, I understand that that Starbucks is proposing to relocate where it would be on the north end rather than on the south end. And you talked about the fact that it would require less losses of parking spaces, less reduction. But my concern is still the same as it was before, and that is not only the traffic circulation and congestion, but some reduction of necessary parking, pedestrian safety, and the obstruction of emergency vehicles and fire lane access. Are you suggesting, or are you saying to us that the relocation would reduce those concerns?
The short answer, if I wanted to give it to you, would be yes. But in all candor, I'm not gonna tell you that, sir. My understanding in my review of the design that they have tentatively provided to me is that it does create a better flow of traffic where it doesn't have a potential for backup on the access that was originally set up. And because of that, they believe that they'll have better flow through all the way through the whole system. There are affidavits which were submitted at a prior hearing dealing with the fact that a number of the store managers have indicated that the premises has never been full parking lot. I don't know because, to be candid, I don't shop there. Secondly, what is clear from my review of the information is that the peak hours for Starbucks is well prior to when the mall gets really busy. That doesn't mean there won't be some conflict. I'm not going to sit here and tell this board something that you already know. There always is conflict anytime you add additional development to an existing development. That's just a fact of life. But whether it's going to reach the severity of what it was on the south side, I'm being told by the engineers, no, it will not. Again, sir, that's third-party information. Did you hear me promise you anything? No, sir. I am not. I'm parroting. But I think, and going back to the main thesis of what I'm trying to request of you is, if you agree to allow this to be passed on to the commissioners with approval, then the burden's on my client and their engineers and their traffic people to convince first this young lady and the rest of the staff, and then you, and then the commissioners. And if they can't, they can't. I'm simply requesting that you give us that opportunity to proceed accordingly.
I have
Okay.
one last question.
Okay.
You said that if we approved this text amendment, it would not open the doors wide, but this would be very specific. Correct?
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
What information do you have that would convince me that that's the case?
The engineers and surveyors looked at the totality of your existing area that is zoned for this particular zone. They then looked to see what in fact you had in there, okay? First, it has to be a shopping center. Secondly, it has to be 20 acres. And there were no other sites that met those two requirements. Now, we all know the future is not necessarily static. There's always the potential for change. That's always true, sir. I don't care what we do. But at least, and all we do is plan based on what you presently have. So my assertion to you, and yes, it's an assertion, and I indicated if Ms. Wyatt disagrees with that, she knows more about this town than I'm ever gonna know. far as I can tell, and based on what the engineers, surveyors have indicated to me, there's no other site that would meet those particular parameters. And that's the reason it was chosen in the language to state it that way. Because we recognized that it was important to this town to limit this ability. Try to do the best we could.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions for Mr. Gray?
Just one question, and this is more of a legal question, and I'm not a lawyer or anything, but I'm looking at that first provision, 7.29.2, and you've just said that, you know, this is site-specific. It's going to limit the amount, the door's not going to be open that wide, whereby, you know, a number of people were requesting this. When you have 20 acres and it has to be in a shopping center, it seems to me, I'm just wondering legally, is that cool? Is that fine? Is that okay? I mean, to scale back a piece, to me, it just seems like you're tailoring an amendment to our zoning regulations that is really only identifying one piece of property that this can happen on. And to me, that seems outrageous. I mean, it just seems a little bit. I'm not. That's why it's a legal question. It's not a question about this particular. It's not. The amendment just seems to. The amendment just seems to focus too much on one piece of property, and I'm just like, is this fine? Is this cool? Is this good?
Well, that's not, is that illegal? Are those illegal?
Well, it is a legal.
This cool and good.
No, it is a legal question because I'm not sure
No,
you can actually do stuff like
Is
this.
it spot zoning? Are you asking that?
Well, it kind of gets at that, Molly. I think you're exactly right. It kind of gets at, hey, this is focused on one.
It feels like a workaround.
Well,
spot zoning. It
at
feels like a
this point, I'm
workaround.
wondering, and, you know,
We're in
so,
discussion at this point.
Yeah, I
Mr. Gray,
think
we're in discussion, right?
Well, I
So
was
that's what
asking
wanna
Mr.
do.
Gray the
Well,
question.
Well, you're asking him a legal question, and
Yeah.
he's not, you know, gonna answer our legal questions anyway, the town's legal questions. He's here to represent the applicant. So, but, I mean, if you'd like to venture comments, please do. But we're trying to, you know, I think we are in the discussion phase more so than asking him questions.
I have a similar
Unless you'd like to make comments to that, Mr. Gray.
I wouldn't have a problem commenting on it, ma'am. It's not infrequent that towns or counties do adopt ordinances where the language in the ordinance restricts uses to specific areas, and then can also put conditions that even restrict it further. That can be done and has been done. And is it legal? Yes.
But you asked if it was cool, that's a different
Well,
term.
it's like, I'm just concerned about the legal challenge.
Right, absolutely, no, okay, well, thank you.
That's a legitimate concern. So
Right,
I'm not
right. So we
disagreeing
can
with
still
that.
decide
I'm just
whether it's
telling
something
you,
we wanna do
on my
as a planning
side,
board.
It's just,
we've done this enough, and I've done it with enough towns and counties to know that
Mhm.
it can be done.
Right,
That's up to the boards. It's no different than if, and let me make one quick comment, I'm gonna shut up so you all can do. Counties and towns, through their boards, can restrict uses. They can restrict and they can put conditions. They can do so in such a fashion so that it limits the amount of a use to even more limited than a particular zone. And that's done, frankly, very frequently. Any other questions, then I will go sit down so you all can discuss.
thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Questions, anybody?
I have one quick question
Oh,
for
okay.
Kelly.
Oh, for Kelly,
Yeah, you mentioned that
thank you, sir.
he mentioned that there were affidavits submitted by the property tenants saying that there wasn't I thought that we had some letters from tenants saying that the parking hadn't been full before.
Correct, yes,
Okay.
and it wasn't part of the text amendment, but it was submitted in conjunction with the proposed site plan when they were
Okay.
running simultaneously. Because I believe we had something from Michael Kors and a handful of other tenants stating that they hadn't seen the parking lot full,
Okay,
and they supported the Starbucks.
okay.
That was included several months back as part of the settlement.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions for Kelly while she's back up there? Bless you. Okay. Let's discuss.
So I've got something weird, and you made me think of it. DOT traffic accidents. Thank you to the internet. Between 65 and 80% of all accidents are caused by people consuming beverages while they're in their vehicles. Rear end accidents involving rear ending in drive-through lanes. So the emergency services needs of this will be atypically high because of the nature of the business. It will involve commerce in flux on wheels. So this will, and that won't be limited only to the parking lot. We've created the right of way for that to add onto the road. Whereas the opposite model, where you would have it inside a business, inside a mall, inside where people park their car and then consume. I could bring up the Seinfeld issue where the person was burned by hot coffee, and that is specifically what I'm kind of talking about. Is this, while it is an avenue for more commerce, it's also an avenue for more misadventure.
Right.
And that isn't incidental considering all of the other high traffic. This will be highest traffic flow when it's highest use of facility. And there is often intelligence in documents that are very old that you can't just see it, and sometimes it's accidental. And I think this is that situation. And I'm not I don't support this modification for not just what I'm saying, but that's another point of view
factor
on it.
Anybody else have comments, discussion?
I don't like having the, we have it in our UDO that we don't want drive-throughs. I don't like having such a narrow allowance for one client when the rest of the town doesn't have the opportunity. What if Front Porch wants to have a drive-through?
Right.
Well, only they can have a drive-through because
Right.
they're Starbucks. I don't agree with narrowing it down so closely and allowing one person to do it.
Well, and I would agree. And another thing that we haven't discussed, I think, which is a goal of our town and land use and all the rest, is local businesses, small local businesses. And so you've just mentioned another coffee shop, but this is certainly not, Starbucks is certainly not a local business.
Right.
And so, I just think that needs to be said, that it's a consideration as well in all that we do.
I agree with Molly and Megan on that. When you said that, we're not trying to open a big door, and I understand that, but at the same time, we have to answer to our constituents, and if they see us making a decision that's so site-specific, it looks very much like favorites, and I have a big concern with how I would explain that to someone that I voted for that. You also mentioned with LU9 that the overall vision of the town and coffee shops can do that. A drive-through doesn't add to that overall vision, like Megan said, and I want to make sure that I'm being fair. And when something's so site-specific like that, it feels very unfair.
I think so.
I also know that at the north end of that shopping center, there's a major entrance into the shopping center there, and it's very busy. And it would just seem to me that this would exacerbate the problems of coming in off of 158 and getting into there. And I just think that it would be a
And then
problem.
people zooming through.
For all the reasons that we
I
stated
think technically I
before.
read something about that there would be signalized access, therefore using that main entrance, but people go in where they want,
Right.
and so,
And the fact that if Starbucks wants to open up a business there, there's probably a store that will accommodate that. And it just because they want a drive-through doesn't
right.
justify us doing a
Fit in our
text
town.
amendment for that.
The other concern too is I remember it was either the last time we talked about Starbucks or the time before that. But I remember we specifically asked why not just go inside the location, and one of the answers was that well, our drive-throughs are up 40%, and
Right.
so that's great for them for their business
Right.
model. But that also has to be considered when we're talking about traffic concern, and with the outlet mall, when you're adding a drive-through, you're not just adding parking spaces that are needed for the drive-through, but there's also a steady flow of traffic, especially if you're at 40%.
And
we have to
mixed in with
take-
pedestrians.
Yeah, and we have
Yeah.
to take that into account.
We also heard from the fire chief that there was a problem and it would make it worse, you know?
Go ahead,
Um,
finish up. I think, I'm not hearing much consensus, so I'm thinking
Yeah,
we're ready.
and
Didn't,
then-
I mean, isn't that what he said?
And then a last stick that I'm gonna throw up under this is, we have parking policies that are written for an intent, which is,
To parking.
we are now more or less expanding the seating capacity into the parking area in the drive-through lane. And it makes it exactly opposite to a lot of what we've been doing, which is making it walkable, making it transferable. So it's kind of, while it is exactly what this applicant wants, it doesn't seem to go anywhere else that we would like.
Right. Okay, do I hear a motion coming?
I make a motion that we follow the staff recommendation and we.
Okay, and deny the text
Absolutely.
amendment?
And to
Okay,
second.
we have a motion
I
and a
second.
second. Any more discussion? All in favor? To deny. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Moving on then to our next agenda item, which is a consideration of a text amendment regarding supplemental regulations as pertains to listing pawn shops, et cetera, et cetera. We all know what we're doing. Kelly's gonna flesh it out for us, too.
But I promise I won't take a long time to do it. As you know, previous meetings, we've discussed accessory uses to retail jewelry shops. Most recently, the Board of Commissioners approved a text amendment which would allow retail jewelry stores to host temporary events not to exceed 90 days with approval from the planning department for precious metals dealers to come in, set up shop inside the store and operate for a specific amount of time. So as the board was reviewing that item, and like I noted, they did adopt it, the applicant also asked the board if they would please consider other items to be able to be brought in, appraised, and potentially purchased. And the board indicated that they would like for staff to look into allowing something like that. So I've relied heavily on this North Carolina General Statute, Section 66, Article 45. But when you actually look at the language of that statute, it already addresses what they're asking. And it would be called a currency converter. And then there's also a definition for cash, because you also hear some people call it a cash converter. But what that is it's a person engaged in the business of purchasing goods from the public for cash at a permanently located retail store, or you can operate as an itinerant merchant. The town of Nags Head doesn't allow itinerant merchants, so the applicant wanting a provision in place for these entities, she's dealing with a group called National Rarities, to be able to come set up at her shop and not only deal with precious metals, but to deal with a variety of other items. We believe actually falls under a definition that's already explicitly written out. It's called currency converter. what we have done is provided a draft ordinance that would not only speak to precious metals, but also currency or cash converters, acknowledging that that's, I don't know, it sounds harsh when you just say that word. So I did propose that maybe we wanted to look at, for the purposes of our zoning ordinance, calling it something different. But we do still have to apply the same regulations in terms of the statute, the record keeping, and that type of thing. Maybe we do want to call it something different, antique and collectible dealer, to be regulated as a currency converter. So that's what the proposal is. What it would look like is previously, I had recommended that we specifically prohibit pawn shops, pawnbrokers, cash converters, scrap dealers, etc. But if we go this route, we would need to strike cash converters from the most recently adopted ordinance, because we're now considering allowing those. And then coming back into the supplemental regulations for jewelry shops, and including language in there that brick and mortar jewelry shops may elect to host temporary events whereby precious metal dealers and antiques and collectible dealers regulated as currency or cash converters can operate within the existing business. And then propose some additional language down here that an antique and collectibles dealer operation shall meet the following conditions. Adherence to the state statutes, section 66, article 45, as it pertains to currency converters, and spelled out that there's some specific record keeping requirements there. And then I might have overthought this, but a concern of mine is that once we get outside the realm of precious metals and jewelry and watches, what someone considers a collectible or what somebody considers a rarity or an antique could be a small item or a large item. It could be an antique vehicle, who knows? So I just wanted to make sure that should we go this route, we're also prohibiting all outdoor storage. So whatever would come into this jewelry shop hosting this event, once it's appraised and purchased, wherever it's stored, it would need to be within the shop and not outside the shop in any way. So that's the extent of the proposal. I just included the definitions straight from the state statute as part of our definitions as well. So I'm happy to answer
Are we
any
getting into like the realm of like narrowly focusing on one specific business again? Like allowing national rarities to come in and do exactly what they want, but are we doing that here?
You know, I'm hesitant. I get the impression that the jeweler, between the jeweler and the vendor that she is looking at having in her shop, they're both very reputable. And perhaps we don't necessarily have a concern with what they might do, but it's not site specific, and it's not vendor specific. So any retail jeweler could contract with any vendor that does precious metals or cash conversion, and have them within their shop as well. So yes, we were looking at it from the lens of what the applicant had presented, but the amendment does open it up to any retail jeweler shop and any licensed precious metal dealer. I will note, cash converters do not have to have that same law enforcement agency permit as a precious metal dealer does. So when we talked about precious metal dealers, we talked about fingerprinting and going through the Department of Public Safety and bonds having to be in place, all of that. That doesn't apply to cash converters. I know nobody wants to hear it, but if you Google cash converters, so like other names for cash converter is pawn shop, secondhand shop, buy, sell, trade, things of that nature. So, trying to pretty it up by saying antiques and collectibles, but at
I don't
its
think we should
core-
pretty it up if that's what it is. We voted on it before, we said no, right?
But now,
Yeah.
the time limit, 90 days is still in place, right? It's not,
It is,
Okay,
that's
okay.
unchanged.
okay,
Because if someone were to host precious metals for 10 days and then this larger array of purchases for another 10 days, it's 20 days, you know, that calendar year for that business. So, yeah, that still applies.
Kelly? Precious
Could also
metals,
be
a lot of times precious metals come with a precious gem. Is that included in this?
It is, so that was included in the previous request that was just adopted by the commissioners in October. So diamonds, things like that, that was
And
part of the
there's-
precious metals.
Okay, and there's not a $50 limit on any of this?
No.
Okay.
No, the definition up here, it's actually down here. It states that this is what a cash converter is, and if you're doing anything outside of that,
Less than
such as
that.
purchasing sporting goods with a value of less than $50, then you're not a cash converter.
Like-
So,
okay. Like thrift stores or stuff too, generally, right?
Kelly, one question I have for you is, has Gail, has the applicant submitted a new application for the addition of newer items that she would like to sell? The question is, I guess the Board of Commissioners did grant her what she originally asked for, and then
What
she,
we approved.
and what we basically supported. But then she gets in front of the elected board and she says, well, wait a second, I want to add a couple more items. Well, that kind of changes the complexion of the application in my mind. And I'm just wondering, has the applicant gone before, has she submitted a new application for what she is proposing to do now? I mean, compared, since the board has already approved
The other.
what she's done, to me, it just seems like, you know, she's taking a second bite of the apple here, and I'm like, you know, it should come at a cost or some kind of a review of it. I'm just,
well, so, Mrs. Kowalski and the attorney for National Rarities made that initial submittal for precious metals. In October, when the board adopted precious metals, they directed staff to consider additional items. So that's what's before you now.
Because her attorney mentioned at the meeting that he wanted to sell baseball cards and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And that's what brought it up, and that's what, like, send it back to the planning
Oh.
board, right?
yeah, you know,
Yeah.
These guns aren't precious metal.
that's true. I did look at the National Rarities, and I included that in your packet. When you go to their website, it lists all the things that they would appraise and purchase. Firearms is one of them.
Artwork.
Artwork,
Yeah.
correct. And you know, if National Rarities says they're taking in baseball cards and collectibles and stamps and paintings and coins, I understand that. The next person may not.
Right.
But I want to follow up with what you were asking. Are you saying that if the purchaser with, you know, for precious metals, if she sold them a piece that she's made, is that your concern?
no, my concern was whether or not the applicant has really gone through the,
Initiated.
gone through the process. And now I understand it's, the board directed the staff to take a look at this again and open up the door a little wider.
Okay.
And somehow I didn't get that. I was kind of like, I was a little bit not sure what
No,
was
it's a
going.
good question. I mean, how would you get it, you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Board of Commissioners kicked this, sent this back down, sent this to us.
They did. So they were comfortable with the precious metals, but then Mrs. Kowalski got up and expressed interest in being able to have whatever vendor she selected, be able to review other items, appraise them, and potentially buy them. And so that's when the board said, okay, we'll adopt what's before us today, in regard to precious metals, but we would like staff to go back and reconsider other items.
I have a question, back to the 90 days, so it, you know, it could theoretically be 90 contiguous days too, right? So you could, somebody, I'm not saying she would do this, but somebody else could do this just in the season for 90 days, or just in the fall, whatever, so that you would basically have a cash conversion operation going on for 3 months in a row.
But that's
And then the
total
rest
for
of the year, you're selling jewelry.
Right, and that's.
Total in the
for
year, but it's,
Right.
to me, it seems a little more palatable if it's really happening a few weekends a year or something, more so than it would be
10 days a year.
a 90, yeah, 90 days is a lot, and, you know, a few holiday weekends or something is one thing, but 90 days seems like a lot, and it seems like it's room for most potential abuse, taken advantage of, thank you.
So where we pulled the 90 days from is back when we were creating the temporary use provisions due to COVID, and we were issuing temporary
that's right.
uses.
Yeah,
We were issuing those temporary use permits every 30 days, not to exceed 90,
Like that.
without another review process.
but that would still allow it to be 90 days in a row. She's saying it came from the COVID restrictions, you know, you had to
Yeah, that's
reissue
where
the permit
that's
every
where we
30
pulled
days,
the
Right,
number
not to
from.
exceed 90, but,
And that's what's been approved for precious metals, 90 days.
Yes.
yeah.
So it'd be weird to say, oh, you can do precious metals for 90 days, but you can do other stuff for 10, but, or would it?
I mean, we can recommend what we want, you know, I mean, but, I mean, might it be more palatable if we knew that it wasn't gonna go on for 90 continuous days? So it was really the kind of thing where somebody, you know, is gonna come down just a few weekends a year or something, or a few, you know, a week here or there to, that's scheduled and marketed or whatever, rather than it turning into a 90-day event, a fair. You were just running a pawn shop for 90 days, right?
Yeah, that seems like a lot. Or we could say it doesn't have to be connected to a store, and like, if somebody wants to come have a fair and collect all these goods and be a cash converter for a weekend, then they can rent a spot, get a business permit, get an event permit, and
Go to the farmer's market.
do all the things.
Who's gonna monitor that?
Who's gonna monitor what?
The
The-
90 continuous?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, like Megan said, if the planning board would like to recommend something different than 90 days, it is part of your recommendation. We can draft it and take that to the board.
It is a point of concern for me. Less than 90 days. I think less than 90 days.
Yeah, or,
It's, yeah. Unless there's a stipulation within the 90 days that says so many days within a 90-day period.
and who's gonna monitor all that, you know, I just think it's.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I'm really hearing that we're all in agreement that we should, you know, agree at all, approve it at all, the addition of the,
Of the 90
well, no,
Consecutive.
of the cash conversion at all, the, you know, the second step of it. You know, in every jewelry store in town, this is gonna be allowed now.
Yeah.
In future, you know, so I mean, are we opening the door to people coming in and opening jewelry stores with the intent of doing this for 90 days a year? Buying firearms, possibly, for example.
Right, that doesn't sound
There-
appealing, but at the same time, it's like, I mean, just to be devil's advocate here for a minute, but like, if somebody came into Gale with a painting that they wanted to Like, are we gonna just say no, anything but, nothing but precious metals?
Right, that's an antique and collectible, right, so I mean, how do you,
I know, I don't know where to draw the line.
Well,
that's why I keep coming back to maybe it not being, I think it would discourage people from taking advantage of it if it wasn't allowed for so long.
Can we put something in that says not consecutively for more than 10 days out of those 90, or is that getting too dicey?
I'm happy to do whatever the consensus is. Like I said, the temporary use permits were 30 days, not to exceed 90, so I don't know if 30 is a better number than
And that
90.
And that's what this is, it's a temporary use permit.
It's
is what would be
basically, it's
issued.
essentially
And that would
creating-
have to be issued by the planning staff at each time it happens?
Well, the way we had originally written it for precious metals, we had just said, you need to notify us when you're coming, the amount of days you'll be there, and the items that you're intending to collect.
But that's gonna get unwieldy.
Because our thought was initially, if National Rarities or someone comes in for a 2 or 3 day event once a year, are we gonna take 3 days to get the application correct, enter it in, process it, charge a fee, have somebody sign for it? I mean, was that overkill?
Right,
So we just thought, okay, just let us know when you're coming and confirm to me or whomever that you're only accepting precious metals.
but now this would change, you're accepting precious metals and other antiques and collectibles.
We could say antiques and collectibles with no firearms or weapons.
Weapons.
Is there a time?
People collect swords.
Do they have a certain time? My husband does.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's like weird. Is there a time frame that they have to know? Like, can they send you an email at 9 a.m. and start it at 9:30?
As long as I'm able to document the dates that they're there, that's really all I'm looking for at this point. And
Okay.
confirmation of what they're accepting. I was trying to not make it a cumbersome
Please start that rumor.
Did-
process.
Okay.
You're quiet, Gary.
Is there a record of everything that the jewelry store is exchanging?
Yes,
So we know who's buying, we know who's selling, we know what is being sold,
mhm.
and we have fingerprints and police records or something like that on the people involved?
Yes, so that's,
So we can track and monitor all of that, right?
Only on the precious metal,
so
right?
that's for precious metals. The fingerprinting of anybody involved in the business.
Right.
And that high level of detailed record keeping. So just cash converters, there's a lesser requirement for record keeping. You just need to document, look at the person's driver's license, get their information, document the item. So in both of these scenarios, but more so with precious metals, the concern is that should one of those items come up later as being involved in a theft or something like that, our police then know how to move forward.
But that could apply to artwork?
That wouldn't apply to firearms, though.
Well, sure. You have an antique firearm,
Right,
it's worth a lot of money.
and who decides if it's antique either?
Oh, she wrote it.
But I'm saying if it's
Deciding
not
if it's
an,
antique, it could be just an operational firearm, I mean,
so firearms wouldn't have to fall unless it was an antique. It wouldn't fall under the fingerprinting.
Correct, firearm would just fall under, firearm would
Collectibles.
not be considered a precious metal. It
Right.
would just be
Other item,
what?
other item.
Another
Right.
item, correct. And
But wouldn't that come under then, you're selling a firearm, that there are different statutes applying to that federally?
so our Chief of Police Perry so that if it were an antique gun, there's no transfer of permit, of gun permit or gun registry, whatever, I don't know. Permit. There doesn't have to be a transfer in that, regard, but if it is like a firearm that you could go use today, there is a permit associated with it, and that permit has to be transferred as well. So that should something ever happen with that firearm, they can trace the ownership of it.
And there's a
Who's dis-
definition of an antique firearm.
Who's deciding?
Right.
Who's
That's it.
deciding if it's antique or not?
Exactly
Is that
right.
20
That is
This
it.
makes me,
Yeah.
operational would be my biggest concern, not whether it's any
So
antique
then you
or
have to
not.
try it out?
Can you fire it?
Yeah, that,
Buy it if
I
they
mean,
buy it and then they
I
I
make
just, I don't know.
How's that
my
work?
expertise is not here, so I don't wanna.
There's so many
Neither.
questions. There's
There
so
are a
many
lot of questions.
Maybe
And so many logistic things that
eliminate the firearm.
I don't, you think just eliminate the firearms?
Can you?
We can write that in, but our enforceability of it is going to be limited.
Or maybe if we put in our concern is that firearms is a gray area between operational and antiques, because we don't.
And
Okay,
the
so-
stretch of time is also a
Okay, so
concern.
are we good with the, we're on firearms now, and maybe length of time is a bit of an, is an issue.
Yeah.
But we're okay with the general concept of expanding this based on,
No,
no.
no, I'm not at all. I don't want to see pawn shops in the town, as simple as that. And that's exactly the direction we're going. And now we add guns into it? I mean,
And I'm with Gary on this.
I mean, this is not the town of Nags Head. I'm sorry, I don't agree with this.
And
We gave
That's
the
why I was
applicant,
asking. I'm not-
no,
I'm
well,
not- I
we
wasn't
gave the
saying-
applicant
assuming
what
you
she
were.
asked for,
We finally got
basically.
Gary going.
Then she changed her mind at the end, and she wanted additional
Board
stuff.
approved it.
Okay, so.
Yes, the board
Well, the
approved
board
it.
approved it like
I
it
mean,
was.
Yeah, but now it's,
Already approved this.
yeah, I know, but
No,
I'm not supporting.
This second stage is what we're on, if you will.
This is why you're saying it's concerning that it got thrown.
Okay,
in,
so I
because
mean,
all that stuff.
Yeah.
can
If,
come
if
in.
we don't have to, that's what we're here for.
Well, I'm just saying what I feel. I'm just,
Okay, no, you're fine. I mean, I think, and I'm hearing that a little bit in general, because when they were getting mired down and trying to tailor it, how long and whether there's firearms and all that stuff, so I mean, the
It's-
BOC,
and
the
this is
BOC can
very-
still do what they want, but yeah, power tools,
Those power tools,
This
antique
is
tools.
also very language oriented. And, you know, how do you want to define something? Is it antique or, you know, so we're really starting to cut this pretty close because of where we're going. But this is, you know, to use another, you know, this is a nose in the camel's nose is in the tent.
Like when somebody has an auction, like, they would get auctions in town, right? How do they do it? They just get a permit, right, and have an auction?
Yeah, I mean, there's specific requirements
Right.
for that as well.
So this is sort of like reverse auction, I guess, but
Yeah, and there are locations in the town that I'm aware of that operate by consignment. Like vendors can go place their items in there and they're on consignment, and then if they get purchased, you know, ownership of the item never leaves the original owner, right? So when it's purchased, a percentage goes to the vendor and some goes to the person. It's different, it is different from pawn shop in the sense that when somebody takes their item to a pawn shop, it's assessed a value, that amount is given, and then it's technically a loan at that point. And they have a certain amount of time to pay that loan back with interest and get their item back. It's just that with a cash converter, there's no loan, it's an immediate sale. It's immediate cash and go.
I wasn't here, but Ms. Kowalski was really focusing in on not just the metals, but probably the gems as well, and any kind of jewelry. Can we just limit this to jewelry?
well, that's
So
where
that's
Crushing
actually
Meadows.
already been adopted.
That's been done. That's been adopted.
Well, that's done.
Yes.
And so we could basically then
We could-
say, nothing else but jewelry.
Well, we can just deny this
yeah,
additional
and I think
request
that's
for
where
the,
it sounds like.
yes, we can.
Okay.
And one thing, I'm not saying that you should, but we could always say,
These are our concerns.
Planning board recommends denial. If you're if you're inclined to consider adoption,
These were our
these were the
concerns.
concerns.
Right,
I like that.
okay.
I think
Yeah.
firearms is the thing
Yeah.
that's making me
Okay,
wanna
but,
go, hey.
yeah, and the length of time.
So
So
should we?
do I hear a motion coming along about
Yeah,
this?
you know,
item?
well, first, should we say if we just be pulled what our concerns are, or are we already there?
I think you know what
It
the
ain't-
concerns are,
The
right?
time,
It's length of time.
length of time, firearms, how do we know?
and
Even
other items,
just
not-
general wording
Right,
of
other-
it.
I'll leave it at jewelry.
Yeah, it's, I mean,
Yeah.
people will come up with
I
all
mean-
kinds of things to sell that we haven't thought of. So
Jewelry.
it is a pawn shop. I mean,
It's not so much a concern about Gail, it's a
Obviously
concern about
not.
the blank check.
obviously not.
Right.
We know
yeah.
she'll be respectable.
Pawn shops.
Yeah, I have no doubt that she's, and National Rarities are doing something good, but we're amending for the whole town,
I do like the part about no storage, like on the site, like you wrote in, I think.
Yeah, you don't want it to be all out in the parking lot of guns. Okay, so
Okay.
do we have a motion? Do I
I'll
have
make
a motion?
to deny.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor?
With the concerns.
With the concerns that we've mentioned.
Yeah, if the board wants to.
If the board wants us
Do
to
it.
pursue something more or less,
Well, they
we'd be happy to consider that. But as it sits right now, with the language that's been written, I can't support it. I mean, it seems like it's just evolving. It's just going into.
Okay, well, we're discussing now.
Okay,
We have a motion on the floor
Second.
and a second. Proceed.
No,
Okay,
I'm
okay,
just
you
saying.
said it. All right, great.
Aye.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, there's just the potential for this to get broad.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Now we are going to have a report on the Board of Commissioners' actions. In our October 4th meeting.
So there's not a lot in here, but we did get to introduce Joe as the new deputy planning director.
We got
Um,
introduced to Joe first.
Did. The public hearing for what we've just talked about, actually, with the precious metals and other items. So, like we said, they adopted precious metals and asked staff to come back, so we've taken care of that one. Oh, I do have one item that I would like to pull up very quickly. So, yesterday, we had Daniel Parsons with Low Wire
Oh,
come
good.
to town hall. And
Where's this?
this is where we are proposing our two level 2 public EV chargers. I knew you'd be happy.
Wow.
Yay.
So,
Made you happy.
and it was a great, it was really great to meet with him. He's obviously going to give us a quote for running electrical. We'll have to bore under the parking lot, obviously. But we didn't want to, well, obviously we can't really mess with those handicap spaces right adjacent. North of that, those parking spaces, staff tend to park in those, and so we didn't want to mess with those too much. The parking spaces opposite, closer to Virginia Dare Trail on the south side, didn't want to do anything that was going to take away from the shipwreck visually, because once this goes in, the charger itself will need some bollards around it maybe to keep it protected. So we shifted it up to those two parking spaces there. Mr. Parsons had some great ideas, so he's installed several level 2 EV chargers around town, and he's gonna give us a quote. He knows that we've been talking with ChargePoint, but the vendor that he works with, he was gonna give us their information as well. He said they might be a little cheaper, certainly comparable. And it was great talking with him because he's done this long enough to see what portions of the charger itself fare well in this type of weather environment. He works with someone who is predominantly plastic and not metal, so less rust. He's going to be providing us with all that information, so we're excited about that.
Those will be universal?
Yes, if you have a Tesla, there's an adapter that you could use, but otherwise it will accommodate the most number of
Great.
EVs out there.
I like that it's inside. It feels a little bit safer. Someone can't vandalize or
Yeah.
anything. It seems a little bit more.
That's smart.
That was really cool.
So,
That's great.
and then scrolling down, the board did hear the site plan for the Inn at Wellbone, the 90-unit hotel. Again, this was brought back because they were running up on their expiration for their site plan approval. The board did approve the site plan, but they placed a condition on it regarding the right-of-way for Lakeside, and that there be essentially 3 lanes of traffic. So as far as pulling in would be 1 lane, but as you're trying to leave Lakeside and get out onto 158, that you have 2 delineated lanes for left and right traffic. So that's going to be a little cumbersome, but we'll see what their engineers bring back for us to look at. And our Septic Health Advisory Committee, the board did appoint a new member, Rob Crawford, to the advisory committee, so he'll be at our next meeting. Board authorized Town Manager Garman to execute an interlocal agreement with Dare County with regard to the EMS station. And right up until a couple of days ago, we were going to have this back to you because we initiated a text amendment for this last month, but we need to do a little bit more work on that. So it'll be probably next month before that gets back to you. But the Board of Commissioners is moving forward with it. And our community survey, we have the results back from that. And we've provided some information here, a little over 1,000 responses, 36% response rate, and we're getting ready to, and Andy can correct me if I'm wrong, but the company that we used, Polco, they're doing an assessment of the results. We also have a retreat, Board of Commissioners retreat coming up in November, and the facilitators for that retreat have also requested their response information, and they're going to be able to do some analysis of that and kind of walk us through it as well. So that will be before the planning board, maybe November, December, perhaps, just an update on the responses. So, and that's it.
Okay, questions for Kelly about BOC actions? Town updates?
I just have one quick update. The board occasionally asks me about the Epstein Street beach access. So I just wanted to update quickly on that. Put the bids out, and we have selected someone. The bid was about $200,000 over what we had originally planned for. And there's some slight modifications from what was seen by this board. Nothing major. No areas of the parking lot that were proposed to be in turf stone, they're now going to go back in asphalt. And then architecturally, what will change is instead of the cedar shake shingles, they're going to be asphalt shingles. However, Epstein is not located within the village. I don't know if you recall, but we included them because visually it appears to be in the village, but it is not part of the planned unit development. Doing those small items was able to bring the price down a little bit. So that's where we are with that, and we have a mid-month meeting tomorrow with the Board of Commissioners where Andy and David Ryan will be there to ask the Board of Commissioners to accept that bid. If they do, we would plan to begin work at the end of October, October 30th, and substantial completion around June 1st, 2024.
Okay, good.
Great.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, then, moving on to our discussion item. Multifamily.
Yes.
Continued
so-
discussion of multifamily development within the UDO. We're gonna get through this one today. Get in a place where they can write us
I'm going to
Yeah.
kick this off and then hand it all over to Joe.
perfect.
So, and I had sent out a revised version like almost at 5 o'clock yesterday. I don't know if anybody actually got a chance to look at it. But there were a couple of changes from the last time we looked at this. Here we go. We created a standard for small multifamily development. And then we've been calling it large multifamily. I don't know, for 2 standards, do we want small and standard, small and regular, small and large? We should talk about what we're gonna call that. I think I used standard in here. And we have a table where we've outlined that. We talked about how some of these larger lots, especially down around the Whalebone area, that our previous density standard would give those lots potentially 90+ units, and that at some point maybe we consider just an overall cap in the number of units that we would allow. We've worked that in there. We've proposed 60, but that's certainly up for discussion. Talking about, for townhome development at least, having maximum of 4 units per building. That's also something that we can discuss more. And having a 10-foot separation, we talked about how we liked that, instead of just having one long row of townhomes, to have them kind of separated up, and Joe has some good visuals for that. We added language into the proposed definition that we had for workforce housing to include remote work. And then when you looked at your chart, I had highlighted in green items that I was hoping we could have more discussion on today, if everybody's up for it. And real quickly, before I hand it over, we'll just show the table. So here's our standard multifamily and our small multifamily.
Sorry.
Lot width for standard multifamilies unchanged, 150 feet. I honestly put all this in red and underlined because it was easier to just approach the chart fresh
Yeah.
instead of trying to go and backtrack. For our small multifamily, there would not be a minimum lot width. Minimum lot area, and I've included there to make sure that it's area in uplands. We would start at 26,000 square feet for your standard multifamily. That's unchanged. We're proposing a 16,000 square foot lot area for the small multifamily development. Where that comes from is we're only thinking about putting C2 back in, putting multifamily back in the C2.
Right.
And the minimum lot size for the C2 is 15,000 square feet. 16,000 square feet is the lot area where you could have a duplex. And then, I'm sorry, 16,000 is the lot area that is required to have a large residential dwelling. So anything 3,500 square feet up to 5,000 square feet. And then for a duplex, you need 22.5. So we landed on 16 because if our standard multifamily starts at 26 and our small multifamily doesn't start until 22.5, that seems to not matter too much, and Joe could probably give you the exact number of properties that would actually affect. So we're starting our small multifamily at 16,000, and we're going to go up to 25,999 square feet. So if your lot area is within that realm, you qualify for small multifamily. If you're 26,000 and above, you would be regulated by our standard or large, however we want to call it, multifamily. Everything that we're proposing would still be for properties with frontage on US Highway 158 in the C2 district. For your standard multifamily development, we didn't change this. The side yard setback would be, that's better, would be 35 feet. And the setbacks that we are proposing for the small multifamily would just be those of a residential dwelling. 30 in the front, 10 on the sides, 15 if it's a corner lot, 20% of the lot depth not to exceed 30. For height, this is an area where if we have time, we would love to have some discussion on this. So for a small development, it made sense to keep height the same way that we have it for just a large residential dwelling. 35 feet, you can go to 42 if you have an 812 roof pitch, and in no case should you exceed 3 stories. But I have planning board discussion under height for our standard or large. I think from staff's perspective, we don't want to exceed 3 stories in any circumstance. So we could either just say not to exceed 3 stories, or we could keep it the same. 35 feet can go to 42. It might be hard to get an 812 roof pitch the larger the building gets. So that's something that we can talk about. If you want to change the height standard for those large multifamily developments. Open space stayed the same. 50% of your side yards shall remain open space. Lot coverage, proposed 55% for both. Their thought there was if we want to incentivize the small multifamily, we shouldn't really make it that much different from our large multifamily. And providing the same lot coverage would be one way to provide that incentive. In both scenarios, they're going to be regulated from stormwater perspective at the 4.3-inch stormwater management for commercial development. So density, here's a big one that we want to talk about as well. So for our large, like we said, 26,000 square feet. Off the bat, that gets you your first 3 units. And then we talked about what was the best number per unit after. And we felt like there was some consensus on 4,500. It used to be 3,500. So that's going to drop our density down a little bit for that. But again, we're capped at 60. So even if you're on a large lot where that standard gets you more than 60, you've got that cap. And for our small development, like I said, minimum 16,000 square feet for your first 3. And then for every unit after, we're back to that 3,500. And again, Joe's got some visuals that it's really going to help understand what that looks like. So maximum number of units, like I said, we're going to cap it at 60 units. We're not going to put a cap for our small multifamily, but it's going to restrict itself for the most part. number of units per building for a large multifamily standard, that's something that we want to talk about. So, like I said, for townhomes, we would like to have them in clusters of 4 or 5 or whatever we agree on, but you know, it was a cluster of 4, then some open space, cluster of 4, open space. But when you're talking about an apartment, what's that number? Again, we're capping it at 60, so perhaps that's what we need to put there. Keep in mind, buildings can't exceed 20,000 square feet, so a large multifamily development, apartment style, could be 2 20,000 square feet buildings. There's nothing that would prohibit that. So that's one thing that we want to talk about a little bit more. For small multifamily, we didn't put a cap there. Both of these would be deed restricted for long-term occupancy or tenancy and workforce housing. What I didn't delve into on the small side is if you're only allowed 5 units, are we going to get into that minimum of 60%? Or do we just want to say it all has to be long-term and workforce? That's something we can talk about. Unit size, minimum of 800 for both, and a maximum of 1,750 square feet. I don't know if everybody on this board remembers, but I don't think it's been over a year ago, but we heard from Eddie Goodrich wanting to increase the size of cottages, and we got into this conversation about
Go up to 2,000.
at what size is it not a cottage? When does it become a single-family dwelling? And I think everybody kind of had a different idea there. But we landed at 1,750 being the cap for a cottage in a cottage court. So that's where we pulled the 1,750 from on that, but we can certainly discuss it. If we want to reduce it, increase it, we can do that. For our buffer yards, in addition to the buffering requirements included for commercial design standards, a 10-foot wide commercial transitional protective yard shall be provided consistent with 10.93.3.2. I should have included that for your review, but that is the section that says when you've got a non-single or two-family use, any non-single or two-family use would require a 10-foot wide buffer with 2 rows of plantings along the property boundaries. We kept in there, instead of just saying that and leaving it alone, we kept in there some standards on commercial design, because that's where we talk about a certain percentage needing to be in turf stone. That's where we talk about some interior parking lot landscaping being required. That's where we talk about parking lot buffers. That's where we talk about vegetative screening for elevated structures, things of that nature. So the commercial design standards opens up a variety of buffering needed, but at a minimum, you're going to have a 10-foot wide buffer with 2 rows of plantings around all property lines. And happy to discuss that more. So at our last meeting, in terms of architectural design, I'll be honest, I was really focused on townhome because we said we want to incentivize townhomes over apartment style. So in my mind, I was very much thinking townhome, and you know, is 150 or 175 hard to reach for a townhome? Perhaps not. But we didn't say you can't have an apartment building. We just said we prefer to have townhomes. So I originally said 175, but when you think about it, your numbers come from your 812 roof pitch. And if you have a large building, you're not going to be able to get that 812 pitch. You have numbers, a high amount comes from porches. And so the ability to incorporate compliant porches into townhomes and apartments might become difficult as well. So just more thought on that. Is 150, do we believe they can attain 150? Could they attain more than that? And that might be an effort that staff needs to go back and work on and bring to you, but discussion would be great, again, if there's time. And that's pretty much it. I provided an attachment to each of you yesterday. I can bring it up if we have time to talk about it, if we just want to discuss it generally. But adding in a requirement for outdoor amenity areas that are going to be separate from open space. To talk about having areas for, playgrounds, sidewalks, talk about ADA accessibility, things of that nature, just to provide amenities for the development as a whole. So it's a lot to go through. I think Joe's presentation will help provide inform a lot of this visually. So what we've written, what it's going to look like visually. So, all right, I'll
Turn
pull
it
that
over.
up.
Thank you, Kelly. Hey, Joe.
Hey, good morning.
Let's start with that.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a fair question.
So even though the state has said we can't do anything, like, where we're assuming that we'll get those privileges back, and that's why we're still having these discussions
Well, I mean, we've still got our code. We still need to put multifamily in. I mean, that,
in our code.
yeah,
And that's only under the 35 million
right,
that they got. So like WODA's still part of that.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
Still,
Okay,
and there's a legal
Anyone
challenge
else?
to that
Yeah.
too.
okay.
So, yeah, we're not off the hook.
Hi, good morning.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
Kelly went through all the zoning stuff that we have up here. So I hope that I could do a GIS analysis and then some designs in SketchUp that could basically illustrate what the impacts of this zoning text amendment would be potentially. So this is all the stuff Kelly just went through. So started with, here are all the parcels that front on Highway 158 that are really in consideration. And so when we subtract out those that are, basically directly adjacent to 158, you get that. And then when you subtract out smaller than 16,000 square feet and zone C2, you get this. So these are the parcels that would be impacted by this zoning text amendment. Those that are yellow are vacant, those that are green are currently developed. So in looking at that, should have worn my glasses, it's 112, I believe, parcels, close to 250 acres, a little less than that, mostly developed, 15 vacant. Overall impact is around 234 acres. Specifically looking at the vacant parcels again, which are in yellow, and then green is the developed. And again, I have these little notes here that basically this isn't, all these numbers are approximations. They're not considering site constraints that are most likely, that I'm sure exist on every one of these sites. So these are approximations. And then, what we tried to do is, so that's that total pot of, here are the parcels that could be impacted. Now we want to remove the ones that we know basically aren't going to be impacted, which is that the catfish farm ones and the sound parcels. So basically, when you look at those, this is what you get as far as a spread of your vacant parcels. So you really only have one parcel when you take out the Soundside event parcel, that's a vacant parcel, and when you take out the catfish farm parcels, most of them are smaller. Those are the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you go?
Yeah.
How do I go back?
So,
Sorry, that's what I was told.
Sorry.
so
Those like yellow parcels down,
all the way down here.
right there by the Whalebone Junction.
Uh-huh.
see my cursor?
Uh-huh,
Here?
okay.
Apparently, those are non-developable. I don't know. if
Yeah,
you
so
have
the
more
town
information
purchased
on
that with grant funding. It's marsh,
Okay.
essentially. There's no way that they could be done.
Okay.
And then the Soundside parcel is really big here, obviously, but we're not planning on
Thought I was
letting that develop into multifamily. So we just excluded it from the calculations otherwise. So, you know, these little yellow ones are, once you remove the developed parcels, the Catfish Farm parcels, which is what I've been told is their name, and it's easier to reference them
Yeah,
like
now
that.
we know.
That was a new one.
Well, now we know.
Yeah.
I thought it was, you know, I thought it was sort of just the common term for that, so I didn't know that. I apologize. And then the other sound side event parcels are removed. You get just those you know, those are parcels that are adjacent to 158. They are vacant. They are larger than 16,000 square feet, and they are zone C2. And so your breakdown of what they actually are, you know, you have a couple more less than 1 acre, and then really only one sort of larger vacant lot that this would apply to. Again, I wish I had my glasses, but there's only 12 parcels that are vacant. Why is it not? There we go. So now looking at the developed parcels, purple is developed that meet all of those same
Okay.
constraints, adjacent to 158, zone C2, larger than 16,000 square feet. And then the green in this are the vacant. So this is what you get when sort of our usable developed parcels, once we've removed, again, the sort of sound side parcels there. You can see, you know, that blank space in between that purple on the bottom map.
Mhm.
Ultimately, the result of developed parcels in this there's 85. The average is about 2.2 acres. Total just under 200 acres. And my clicker's not working. Can you click me, Kelly?
I got you.
So, in looking at the developed parcels, again, most of them are smaller than 1 acre. You have a couple, you know, spread across the larger acreage, but all in all, most of the developed and undeveloped parcels that this ordinance would apply to are smaller, definitely smaller than 2 acres, averaging between 1.2 and 1 acre when we sort of separate them out, developed versus vacant.
Want me to do it?
Yeah, I guess I don't know why. I saw you do it. So then we look to model basically at the 16,000 square foot size, at the 1 acre lot size, and at a 3 acre lot size, what development would look like with the constraints of this ordinance. Click me, please. Thank you. Start off 16,000 square feet. So last planning board meeting, we kind of discussed, you know, that look and feel of these were important, that we didn't want necessarily these large sort of monolithic structures that looked different and felt different than smaller development in the town. And what could we do to potentially incentivize this, which is where we've sort of separated the small versus large. And so this would be a 3-unit, which would be what is allowed at a 16,000 square foot lot, which complies with the other site requirements of depth, setbacks, buffering. This was designed, if you could click, with sort of the underground parking and that's just a sort of perspective view. Click. So this would be the 1 acre lot. So that's with this sliding scale, sort of what we get, because between 16,000 and 26,000, you could have up to, you know, you have 16,000, there's 43,560 square feet in an acre. So with 16,000 square feet on a small multifamily, you'd have three units, plus 3,500 would put you up to 19,500. You'd have 4 units, and then to 23,000 square feet, between 23,000 and 26,000, you could have 5 units. Now here's a 1 acre lot, and the most you could get is 6 units, because you get 3 at 26,000, and then an additional unit at every 4,500. So it would be 30,500, you'd have your 4th, and then 35,000, you'd have your 5th unit, and then so 1 acre lot, you'd have 6 units. So it kind of allows for more units at that's 26,000 square foot, then really you could have just over the lip of 26,000. But this is, Dave, I heard you with the variation in types of housing that could potentially be in a development. So, you know, you could have the sort of combined two doors, you kind of have the more ranch, sort of typical beach cottage look, or like Unit 5 is sort of like a slender sort of townhome. But again, it's, you know, this is a compliant lot, and could potentially be developed at a 1 acre scale.
Hmm.
And then, hey, what that's on.
It's really helpful to see it.
It is. It's
And
hugely
then here's
helpful.
just a perspective.
I like that car.
Instead of the bird's eye. Yeah, I know. Let's highlight the Volkswagen
Can I,
there.
this is kind of exactly what I was thinking of, instead of everything being the same. This is, to me.
Right, that's what
Yeah,
that's what he was just saying.
yeah, I just really like this visually. It's
Mhm.
much more, it's much less unappealing.
Right. Of course, we won't
Seems to
get
be working
decide
every
that.
other time. Could you click me, Kelly? Thank you. And so this is what I showed you last time as, you know, basically on a 3 acre lot, you could have 26 units. And so this, under the new ordinance with the 40 feet side yard requirement, you wouldn't be able to get sort of just the strip and meet all your setbacks and lot coverage. So hopefully that would help support a little bit of variation in a larger development where you'd have, you know, to be able to accommodate the side yard requirement that would be included in the text amendment. You'd also still want to maximize, obviously, the amount of units. So you could have 26 units just like that last one. But in this, you know, a lot of them are smaller, and then you have sort of the wider ones, or else you wouldn't have enough ability of frontage to have the side yards as well. So I just wanted to show you how that sort of applies on a 3 acre lot. And obviously there's many configurations that could and work, and you know, there are different sites that meet 3 acres, so those type of things are gonna change. But hopefully this helps give you some sort of visual of the implications of what, if the text amendment is adopted, what it could look like and where it could go.
Yeah, it's really helpful, I think.
Yeah.
So that's really
See
all
how
I
it looks.
have. Happy to answer any questions.
Just a question about, what's the separation here on between the units?
Those are 40 feet
40 feet, okay.
side yards, which is the requirement for the large multifamily. And then it's 35 feet, all setbacks everywhere. But even those sort of fatter ones at the bottom of your screen, those are still 45. These are 1,000 square foot units, which have been applied universally to all of these. So obviously, if, in real life, if the developer wanted 60% at market rate, which would be, you know, or excuse me, the 40% they're allowed at market rate, maybe they're bigger, and then the 60% is smaller. But I think what we propose would sort of encourage, as we sort of spoke to last meeting, maybe more variation in the housing type, and you know, potentially create sort of better communities with more lot coverage between, and placemaking that could happen. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is a big help.
So this is a townhome at 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, at this scale, I think it's I think the width of this lot was like 295, and then however deep whatever that equals 3 acres. But yeah, each one of those townhomes are 1,000 square feet. I believe they were 40 feet deep and 25 feet wide each, is how I modeled this specific site. Because last time I had 2,000 square foot
Is that
units, and
two
everyone kind of
bedroom?
said that's not really.
This
Right.
would be
Too
like a
big.
2-bedroom?
So yeah, I have 2 bedrooms as far as the parking requirement. 1,000 square feet, 2 bedroom, I felt was a pretty good template. But that, you know, I can adjust that and
Okay.
fit that as.
So if they were 1,700 square feet, would they fit on the lot?
They would, but you know, we don't have any requirements against 2x2s and that kind of thing. So I think you'd get, to meet the side yard, you would probably get more like units 2 and 3 in this picture, where you have, you know, sort of
Townhouse
one
type.
above the other,
Right, yeah.
to accomplish having enough side yard. But it would depend on the lot, of course. So these are template
Right.
lots that I've
Yeah.
created for this hypothetical. But if it was a long, skinny lot, and width was your biggest constraint, it would just depend on the lot, what the site design would look like.
Well, sort of while we're on this subject, because I want to tick away at some of these things we have to decide about, let's talk about size. 850 and 1750, 850 and 1750?
800.
800 and
Yes,
1750.
The minimum 800 square feet, maximum 1750.
Well, I definitely don't want to go any bigger than 1750, I wouldn't think. Everybody
That's
kinda
pretty good
feel like
size,
that?
yeah.
How about the minimum?
No, I'm good with it.
800s?
That's small.
It is small, one bedroom, whatever, right?
One bedroom.
Yeah.
Like
So I
apartment
think
size.
is everybody kind of good with that?
That is.
David?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we have that one done. Yay.
All right, so 800?
Yes, 800 and 1750.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're gonna stick with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I got us off track on a good discussion on,
The
you
height?
guys were discussing, but I just thought we should,
Should we go from the top to the bottom or not?
yeah, let's just, what do you think about that? I propose we just kind of go from the top to the bottom
Yeah. That's
and try to knock some things out.
What are we on, height?
Yeah, let's get there. I'm gonna get there.
So I can pull this up in Word.
Well, yeah, or do we want to start at the very top
Just make some notes as we go.
on the amendment itself at the very top, or you're on the chart? Okay, either
Well,
way.
so the amendment up here, all that we did was added, remote work. You'll see right here, in persons working remotely.
Okay.
I mean, how do, well,
I'll throw one thing out, actually technically, and I may be responsible for this being wrong, is that the long-term tenancy is not, it's 90. So short-term by the Vacation Rental Act is less than 90.
Okay.
So it's just 90 plus, whatever, it's a small thing, but, we want to get it right, so
All right, so we're gonna change.
91 to 90.
I guess there's no way to ensure that workforce and affordable are the same thing. Like, there's workforce housing down here, but there's people can't afford it. Like, I was talking to a mother the other day who was couldn't find a home. Single mother, $2,500 for rent is what the going rate is. So there's housing available, but she cannot afford it.
Right.
So like, how do we, I don't know, like, how do we assure that, like, the housing that if it's built, might be workforce, but it might not be affordable
I don't think we
workforce
can.
housing?
I don't think we can, actually, honestly,
Yeah,
Well,
there's a lot of market force
Right.
stuff in here.
Yeah.
It's kind of, this is field of dreams, if we build it, or,
Right.
if we build it in code,
That's the question.
how will it be filled out? And that to me, I think that's the sausage we're trying to make here,
Mm-hmm.
How is this going to meet the market, this market of ideas? How's it going to actually meet the market out there, and how will it be bent,
It has to be somewhat profitable for the developer.
Mm-hmm.
right?
And that's the thing too, though, when you think about, there's the other side to it, like with Woda Cooper, when the town did the white paper report on Woda Cooper, it was the other side where it was too affordable, where I think the 20% AMI was $22,000 for a
Right.
one bedroom, which I have managers at my ice cream shop that wouldn't qualify for that.
Right. So
I just wanted to insert, I know there's some conversation about the buildability, and we can write it, but is it going to be built? And I know to date, there's kind of been a consensus of let's put together what we want to see. And there's nothing that says if a builder is interested but needs something amended, that they can't come through the text amendment process.
That's
Right,
good.
right.
So-
Well, and that's actually kind of where I'm hoping to go with this.
Right.
Let's really aspirationally create something that is preferable.
Right, and then,
And then if they want to modify it, then we can kick the walls around then.
It's easier to amend it that way than it is
Absolutely.
to start
And
under
this-
and have someone take advantage.
Right.
This, a lot of this discussion that we're having right now about this is something I keep thinking is something Gary said a while ago. a town that looks good often is a town that says no. We're proposing saying yes, but what are we saying yes to?
Right,
So that's really the box that I'm in right now.
right.
Sorry
Yeah,
to
no,
do
no,
that.
no, I understand.
Okay. So, Kelly, back to, you were saying the only thing that's really changed in the,
Is the remote work, and then I
Right.
did put something in here. It is probably going to be a big tackle for today, and maybe it's something you just want to guide staff to look into, but, do we want to explore options that would allow, say, Food Lion to purchase 3 units?
I
Because right
think so.
now, we're saying an entity wouldn't be able to purchase these deed restricted units, but do we want to include some language where an entity can, perhaps under certain conditions?
Well, as long as they meet the requirements of the occupancy, right?
If
I
it's
mean,
deed restricted, it
Right, if
passes
it's,
with it.
right.
Okay.
I mean, I think we should at least explore it.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, there's bound to be some people who would take advantage of that, and it might actually become workforce housing.
And my concern is that it becomes a dormitory, and that's a different caveat, but I think that might be able to be put into, bunk beds per room,
Oh,
Dormitory.
hot sheeting when, that kind of things.
you mean like we have already, with
Yeah.
30
Exactly.
people living in a beach
Yeah,
house?
so let's see if we can build something in code that we don't want and already exists that we don't want. Because it could multiply out of control, it could be a little out of control.
So, are you saying you don't think we should allow entities to purchase them, or we need to try to find a way to?
I think we do with some,
Might even develop them, right?
exactly, well, yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, so, but you're right, then, we don't want,
Think about this, then one of the number one concerns you have with the business is who's gonna work there.
right,
If you can give them a landing pad to work, then that's a bit, short of building, that's a lot. So yeah, absolutely. I think that, a lot of corporations, incorporated entities would be looking at this, yeah.
so do you have a plan to, how to address that? How to kind of start finding out? Are you just gonna actually talk to people, or actually
So
talk to
I was
people?
actually just going to explore how other places
Mhm.
have addressed it.
Yeah,
I had not necessarily thought about opening this up to the community just yet. I think it
it's early.
could
Yes.
derail
Right.
the conversation thus far. So my goal was to just have this put together, we can see what other places are doing, and then I can bring that language back to
Mm-hmm.
you.
Okay, but I think we have consensus that we'd like to at least consider it.
Yes.
Okay. So then we're working through, okay, now we are on the table, right? Right. Height, like you said, I think.
Well, and I didn't highlight this one, but are we comfortable with the application, the same setbacks that would apply to a large residential dwelling, applying to small multifamily? Because what you've seen is small multifamily will only get you 5 units, correct?
Yeah, at the highest.
So between 16 and 26,
Five's the
you're only
most.
going to have 5 units, however that's configured. And would you want to apply the same setbacks to a 5-unit multifamily development that you would apply to a 9-bedroom, 5,000 square foot large residential dwelling? Do you, whether it's a rental or not,
Mm-hmm.
It's basically the same thing.
I
just
feel like
divided
it'd
up
be-
so the other piece
I think they should be
is-
the same, right?
Yeah. The only thing that I can think of is our most restrictive side yard is 12 feet. So are you fine with the 10, which is the R2? It's 12 in the R1. So you could say a 12-foot side yard setback, 10-foot upper yard.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're trying to incentivize these smaller ones a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
And if it means they'd be more
We
spread
wanna
apart
Right.
within the
wanna
property,
increase it
that's
to
not a
12.
bad thing either.
right,
Rather than put right together.
should say it so everybody can hear you.
I think I like that idea because it gives them more, so they can spread out the units within the property like we saw in the drawing,
Right.
than have to mush them all, put them all together,
Right.
Okay.
which makes it more aesthetic, not.
And by the way, for whatever it's worth, I think standard and small is gonna get confusing. I think you were kind of saying small and large.
Okay.
I mean, that's what it is, it's small and large, right? I mean, when you're right on the border, but I just think it'll be simpler.
Right, because we're using standard for, there's two different standards.
Right, right. I think small and large is just easier to comprehend, and,
Right.
I mean, if you're right on the cusp, then, oh well. But,
When we look at the drawings, that's what makes, I think, today's drawings look more appealing.
Right.
They're more staggered out.
right. But-
So, I will say, so like the smaller units, I mean, we have the 10-foot spacing requirement side yard on, as far as like the setback, meaning sort of from where your development can be from like bordering another property.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can pull up one of Joe's. So the setback that question was referring to was the area here. So what we've shown is 10 feet, but the most restrictive side yard setback within the town is 12.
So those would have to come down 2 more feet. And so there's no, if there was spacing between the buildings, it would be a 10-foot side
You would
yard.
still keep it 10.
But
Yeah.
those are, on a lot like this, I think it would be pretty challenging to meet. I think if it was closer to the 26,000, you'd have more space, but a 16,000 square foot lot with the setback requirements, if you're gonna get 3 units, I would be surprised to see the 10-foot side yard be applied, if that makes sense.
So are you saying, because we did 10 here, are you saying if we bumped it to 12, that it would make it?
Well, no, I think that'd be fine,
Untenable.
but I think our sort of requirement, where on the larger lot, we have the 40-foot spacing between the buildings. When it's a lot this big, the 10-foot spacing between the buildings.
So I was talking about
Right,
actually
you're
more
talking about
so
the side
about the
yard.
setback, not the building separation. I
Right.
was talking about
The setback.
as being 10 or 12. The building separation for large would still be 10.
Okay,
And I would not place a separation requirement for the small.
right,
So then
Because-
setback would be 12.
right.
12?
I think so.
That makes sense.
Because when you think about that side yard, you have 12-foot setback to your building, 10 feet of that's going to be vegetated with 2 rows of planting.
Right,
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
okay.
And if
So
you
let's.
plant Russian olives, then you'll be about 1 foot.
That to 12.
And then height,
I think the height on the small makes sense, it's the
Mhm.
large that, if you have, say you do have
a big building,
that apartment style building, it might be hard to get an A12 pitch to allow them to 42.
What do we say for hotels, which are basically apartments?
The hotel height is 60.
Has the what?
60?
60. I
I
don't,
don't want that.
No,
we would
No.
want to go to 60.
No.
But it's interesting for a hotel.
it's just still with a maximum of 3 stories.
Or we could just cap the large max of 3 stories and not put a 35, 42. We could
Right.
just say maximum 3 stories. And then that way they can get their A12. It's just, they'll still have their 3 stories and it won't prohibit them from providing an A12 roof pitch to get those architectural points if they wish to do so.
But there'd still be a maximum height. You-
Well, I was thinking for the large apartment style.
Oh, okay.
Well, let me ask you,
Break
there's,
it up into townhome and apartment.
there seems to be a question about what constitutes a story. In other words, if you have a parking area underneath your building, some folks won't call that a story. That's like, you got 12 feet or 15 feet or whatever it is underneath your building. That's for your cars parking, but that doesn't generally count as a.
Correct. So I would revise this to say 3 habitable floors.
Okay. That makes better sense.
Yeah.
That's,
And
that
how
was one
high
of the
would that
questions
be?
I had as well.
So that would,
Okay.
are you still
Thank you.
talking the maximum of 42?
So right now, our residential dwellings have a maximum of 3 habitable floors. So think about your large residential dwelling.
Okay.
That's 3 habitable. Maxed out, that's 3 habitable floors
With a height restriction of 42 feet.
with a height restriction of 42.
Okay.
Okay.
So, yeah, are we saying that we would allow 3 floors with no maximum height for the big ones? Or is there still a maximum height?
Well, so for a townhome development where you had a clump of 4, or now that we've decided between 16 and 26, you can max 5, maybe we want our max clump to be 5. I don't know. But let's say you've got your clump of 4. I feel like, and Andy and Joe and anybody else can correct me, I feel like with 4 townhomes, your ability to have 2 or 3 stories and have an 8-12 roof pitch and keep it under 42 is potentially doable, especially with a 2-story townhome, 8-12 roof pitch. So for townhomes, I'm not as worried. But when you think about an apartment style building, when you think about an apartment style building,
Uh-oh.
That was ominous.
when you think of a large,
Andy.
Right.
when you think of a large development, there's no way, I mean, we want them to have an 8-12.
Right.
8-12 is indicative of Nags architecture, so we want, and it's gonna give them 25 points towards their 150. So we want to encourage them to have that 8-12, but on a large building, there's no way they can have that large of a building and an 8-12 pitch and keep it under 42.
Didn't we say when we met with the commissioners in that joint meeting that we did not want apartment-style buildings? Didn't everybody kind of agree it was all gonna be townhomes?
I thought I heard that.
Townhouse, townhome, yeah.
Didn't it? I mean, I think we said that with the commissioners.
Well,
Yeah,
that
I
makes
wasn't here,
this
but I
easy.
do remember it.
When we talked, that was the general.
I know that we said we preferred, I didn't take away that we would just absolutely not allow,
Okay.
but, that,
Can I ask,
Yeah, that's what we're talking about now.
can I ask a question about townhomes? And I'm just, it's just more of a curiosity than it is about a regulation, but I'm curious, when we talk about townhomes and you have to own the land underneath the unit, the building, is that correct?
yes.
Okay. How does that actually occur? I mean, relative to subdivision. In other words, if you have like 10 units, and each one of those 10 units has a piece of land underneath the unit, does the staff, does anybody have to go through a subdivision of that land in order for that land to belong to that unit?
That is a part of this process, is to make sure, we haven't brought it to you yet, but yes, there will likely need to be a subdivision aspect of that. But we haven't, that's not part of our ordinance yet.
Well, it seems to fly in the face of our minimum lot size. I mean, when you start talking about, I know, it's more of a.
It's a ownership, more so than a lot.
Well, yeah, but I mean, to me, you're still if you're going through a subdivision, a dividing of the lot into these little parcels,
Maybe it's called something else.
maybe it is. I'm just not, that's why I was wondering, how is this actually working relative to our minimum lots?
Well, they can't function independently. It's still gonna be a townhouse, it'd be a 3 or 4 unit
Right,
townhome,
right.
right? So it's like Kelly said, it's an ownership issue. you know, like opposing a condo, for example.
But if you own the ground underneath the unit, and if all the units burn down, let's say, I mean, under the worst case, then the question becomes one of, well, what can I build back here? Just what was there before, or can I build back single-family house? Or, I mean, no, can I build independent house?
You wouldn't have enough land to build a single-family house.
Well, that's the question about the subdivision. You know, if you have a division of land that's approved by the staff,
At least in my previous experience dealing with them, it's usually, you know, it included a requirement from an HOA. So yes, you own the lot, the individual lot, but the paving, the drive aisle, everything else is common property and it's commonly owned. And so does the actual, when they go to get a record plat for those townhomes and they come in and subdivide once they're approved, fly in the face of our zoning now as a minimum lot size in R2? I understand the point. I don't think it does, because the lot as its own is developable and we're allowing that development, and then everything else is commonly owned. It's just the individual lot. Just like if it was in a condominium and you don't own the land below you, you just own your apartment. Everything else is common ownership.
Right.
Just like when you walk in, you know, the lobby is common ownership. I don't think there's that much of a difference is what I'm saying, as far, because all you own is your building and then your tiny little lot out back. But if your house did burn down and you were going to build it back up, you wouldn't be allowed to do anything but reconstruct your townhome, and everything else in the development isn't owned by you individually. So you wouldn't have the ability to do any other, to allow or build any other use as part of that original approved site plan. That was,
Makes sense.
that's my understanding of it anyway. But for the question of how, right, so once it's developed, you know, then the town, I guess, will snow plow it, and, you know, there's less snow here, but I mean, we're gonna pick up trash. I mean, it's gonna be a part of the town system. It's not gonna be, you know, privately owned, but then who does sort of maintain the parking lot and that kind of thing? You know, is it individual owners or is it an HOA? So I think that's something that should be discussed as well. Maybe not for the smaller lots, but maybe for the larger lots potentially.
Okay, so are we good on height? Do we,
So for the large multifamily, perhaps that's an exercise where we need to come back with various size, well, okay, sorry. If we're not going to move forward with apartment-style buildings, then that probably addresses it.
Would it?
Wouldn't the language here pretty much exclude department-style buildings?
no?
We just haven't written it in yet. That was part of the discussion.
Do we need some
Was
direction on that?
I
Some
feel like that
clarification
would
from the
help.
workshop or whatever?
Just so we don't go down that road.
Yeah, we
so
don't want to
far,
go
and
way
town
down the
staff
road
does a
and
ton of work
have
and
them,
finds
have
out.
us say, well, what about apartments, you know?
Yeah,
We'll do that.
I think that would be good.
Okay,
A clear understanding that it inclusive or exclusive.
right,
Just to save the town staff at the very least from
Right.
doing a lot of work and then.
right.
Or in also inquiries, you know, if it's not in code, then inquiries, you know.
Well, we could still get inquiries, right?
Yeah, I'm counting on it.
Yeah.
Kind of.
The language here with the 42 feet, but you have to have an 8-12 roof pitch. And like Kelly said, it would be very, very difficult to stay at that height and have an 8-12 roof pitch for an apartment. But you can have that for a townhome. So the
Right.
language there would be very
Right, and I think-
specific. It would be restrictive to townhomes.
Yeah, if we went with this.
Yeah,
I think, and that's why they were, I think, asking about whether we wanted to
and that's.
give a
what-
little wiggle room.
No.
But no, not unless we're being asked to move in the direction of certainly considering apartment style.
Right.
We'll get
Right.
clarity.
Okay,
I think
And
that's a
I'll-
great idea.
we can send that out in an email,
Okay,
Okay, that'd be good.
all right, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. Okay, so then we're on, table 7.1.
Do we need to look
Or-
at density?
Do we need to look at what?
Density? Or is that pretty much finalized?
Height?
Well,
Well-
so for density, I think at our last meeting, for the large, no one was comfortable with the 3,500. So we
Bumped it up.
seemed to feel like there was a consensus on one per 4,500.
Okay.
But again, I mean, any of this is open for discussion. And then on the small, we kept it at 3,500, thinking that that would add incentive for someone to pursue the small development over the large development.
Mm-hmm.
Compared it to residential.
Right.
That's why we.
We were comparing it to residential. Are you okay with it, Molly, or you think it needs to?
No, I'm fine, I'm just.
Okay. Okay.
And then
So now
also,
number
I
of
didn't
unit-
highlight this, but we did talk about that cap for the
Oh,
number of
right.
units.
Where'd the 60 come from?
The 60 came from, I don't know that it necessarily came from anywhere. I
Right.
think it's a point of discussion.
Right.
For when it's like one of these huge sites that could go up to 90 or 180, or like there was some
Mhm.
really, really big ones that would allow a great number of units
Right.
that we discussed last time. So I think looking at that compared to 180 units, 60 was like, oh, well, that sounds better.
Yeah, I know. Well, I agree. I just was kind of curious.
And there was
But-
no analysis that we did to get
Right.
to 60. It was, and it's certainly open for discussion.
And looking at the GIS, it was something like the build out of all the large lots without that 60 cap was like 1,923 units. I mean, granted, that's if all of them were developed,
Oh,
but
okay.
then with the 60 unit cap, it was the total build out would only be, I think, 1520 something. So
So less.
there are a couple larger lots that would
Accommodate.
really reduce that total capacity, potential capacity.
And is it going to be just such a deterrent, that, because if you had a site big enough to do a lot more on, then you're just not going to touch it? They're not going to touch it at all? I mean,
I think that's
probably, basically. Well, kind of what we want, right?
Because
Or we
what we've
don't want.
said, right, we want to sort of
Yeah.
have these pockets.
Or you can do it, you have to have a lot of open space and all that.
But maybe not. large
I'm okay with the 60, I mean, does
Yeah.
anybody? Okay, that's a lot, actually, 60 is a lot. Think of the number of people in cars on 60 units.
I do, the one question I have is, are we assigning a number of bedrooms per unit? Because that's where it kicks back into parking, and
I think the assumption that we made, and perhaps we didn't write it in, was no more than 3 bedrooms.
should we throw that in?
Yeah, we can, Joe and I discussed it, and I apologize.
No
that
problem,
we
no
didn't
problem.
get it in there.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
no, I think
also
that's a good idea, David.
1,700 square
the
feet.
fact that
3 bedrooms is a lot.
Parking standard.
right,
And
the parking
1750.
standard being so
Yeah.
directly tied to it, I don't know for this type of development, if you did a 4-bedroom, you'd have to have 3 parking spaces. I mean, maybe, yeah, I mean, we also have the cap on unit size now, so.
Right,
4-bedroom and 1750 be a.
could put, yeah.
Well, and I strictly don't have a problem with opening up to variable bedrooms as long as it does kick into a parking standard, and then that would also glam into lot coverage, which is absolutely fine, understood.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So cap of 3 bedrooms.
Mm-hmm. I can't see any reason to have them big, not in 1750.
Right.
I mean, you can't,
And so this next one, just as I was listening to Joe's presentation, we had decided that for the property between, was it 23,500 or 24,000 to the 26, that was going to be 5, that would get you 5 units.
Right.
So I don't know if we want to keep our unit per building at 4,
Oh,
or for the purpose of, well, and that's for the large, so we could still keep it at 4 for our large multifamily development. And just understand that there's no and I wrote it in there, but I might make it more explicit that there's no maximum, you could go up to the full 5. If you had
If you had space for it.
Yeah.
Which, go back to that graph, I think it only apply, however many are between, less, zone C2 adjacent to 158 that are between 23,000 and 26,000 square feet, I think is maybe 1 parcel or 2 parcels. So.
Right. But still, those will be the ones that So, and do we think that, should we just make it 5 in general? Even on the large one? I mean, is there a big difference between 4 and 5?
I don't think so. I think 5 would be
Kelly?
agreeable.
Sounds like you have something to say.
I mean, either one. I'm thinking in terms of architecturally, and it really, it's unfair to think of it that way because how they reach their 1,000 or how they reach their 70 or 17.5, the dimensions, whether it's 1 story, 2 story, it probably doesn't matter. Whether it's 4 or 5.
Right, so would it just be simpler to just make it 5?
That way.
A maximum of 5 in both?
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
way they could have.
Yeah. I think that's too much.
No.
Gary's okay.
I can come down, I don't really have an opinion on it, but I think it might be weird. Yeah, 4 to 5, yeah.
Okay,
And we can make sure that the board understands,
that we're not,
it was a toss-up between 4,
Right,
Yeah,
right.
visually 4 and 5
right,
were acceptable.
no.
What's their preference?
You might actually get a little more variation with 5, because,
Then
you have to
maybe-
do something,
And
the
that-
odd
that-
man, you got the
and-
oddball.
And that's kind of where I was thinking, you would have, let's call it the center unit, maybe
Right,
that
or
is the
something, or-
lower
yeah.
square footage unit,
And,
and that would lend
instead
to
of
it.
just boom, boom, 4 in a row.
Here, so, okay, if you're gonna go, can you throw this into language? I mean, we can, but, is it worth it? If you're gonna go 5, there has to be a variance in square footage to the odd, the
Oh,
fifth
to the
one.
Right, well,
That kind of resembles our cottage court. I
It-
mean,
right,
It's
Not a
certainly,
bad idea.
it certainly does, but it also
Right.
makes, there's every chance it could make it less unappealing.
Yeah, and
I like that term
We do
to
that
keep-
with the cottage
I'm
court.
gonna keep
yeah,
it
no,
easy.
it
That
is,
makes sense.
it is in the cottage court thing, that there has to be a variation, so.
Mm.
We're just going for,
But at the same time, if you think
going
about
for
it,
the gold now.
But if we're gonna make this affordable, and there's one that is low square footage, smaller,
Could have
it's gonna be more
could
affordable.
have the 800 right in the middle or whatever, right,
Yeah,
and it
but-
might be more.
But then that becomes affordable, and at that point, now we're at 20% in that unit is affordable.
Well, yeah, with the percentage going back and, not going back and forth, but the percentage being varied like we want,
Right.
that does lend itself more for
Absolutely, you
different
have a
use
single
that way.
place.
So
or
that,
whatever,
so
the
then
smaller
suddenly
unit or a
it is a
couple.
20% per design, affordable, yada, yada, yada. And if you think about, and I'm not a contractor, but I imagine that it might leverage more affordability because it's townhomes and they're
Right.
sharing a wall.
Right,
And we're doing this hoping that, with the idea that we might have takers that want to ask for different variations, so this does give more
right,
room for
flexibility.
that too, for them to
Mhm.
come up with unique ideas that might be appealing.
Agree. Okay, 5. And we've already talked about the unit side. Do we need to talk about deed restrictions? I think that's easy.
Yeah, the one question I had on this is for our small multifamily. On the large, we're saying it must all be long-term occupancy and a minimum of 60% for workforce.
Mm-hmm.
But for our small, do we want to say that it all must be deed restricted to long-term and workforce? Or do we want to say, of the 5?
Or of the
Do we
2,
wanna get
there
into
could only be 3.
percentages of what's what on that small cluster?
Yeah, it's kind of hard, because there's so few units, if you only have 3 units,
Right, we're trying to incentivize those, but like, we don't want them to be half,
restricted.
somebody's second home.
Right.
So I would say all of them would be deed restricted to long-term.
Yes,
It's just, did you want
And it's a, it's a gray area too, we've said before, because it could be someone working and then they retire. They don't
Right.
have to move out.
You wanna skip that one and think about it?
Maybe not restrict them at all.
I'd almost feel like we're all saying yes, generally, to all of the above. And, you know, I think we can weight every argument.
Yeah.
But it all, and again, it comes down to language. If you said deed restricted to working people, however, but if they do decide to retire or time moves out, should they be thrown out? Or can we have it be a situation where the original intent was that for it to be a primary dwelling and they were workforce? If it changes, the next occupant will go back to the original intent of the property.
And that, so,
Yeah.
we did not come back with any specific language on what happens to retirees or what happens if there becomes a ADA scenario that we have to deal with. I think some of that's gonna be best dealt with by the attorney.
Okay.
Mhm.
But what I did read about in terms of retirees, I guess this was perhaps in Vail or one of those locations, is if you qualify for workforce housing and then you retired within a certain time frame, you have the option to like buy the unit, like I guess pay off your mortgage or whatever, and then you can stay in it. On the other hand, I don't know that it would just be very difficult if you had your police officer, your firefighter, your EMS put in 25 years. Are we going to ask them to vacate and leave so that we can free it up for someone else? I don't
If
know.
they own it, you can't really do that, right? If they own it, can you really say?
Part of the deed restriction.
Dave had a good
Oh, right.
point.
What?
I think he had a good
Well,
point.
that
No, but-
after they vacate, when they do vacate, it has
Right,
to.
when they
It
sell,
reverts back.
But
And
it has
so
to
I,
go
and
back.
I,
Grandfathered in.
Yeah.
and I like the idea of setting it up that way, and it also creates more stability within whatever we're constructing, so that there won't be a recurring, you know.
So we're gonna say
churn.
that it's workforce, though, it's all workforce to start out with.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, my concern would be, and I don't have any objection to retirees, but we're just gonna get retiree
Exactly,
townhomes if we don't.
exactly.
Because there's not
I'm
income.
Right.
with you on that.
So, yeah, so as I see it, could we create language? Originally, it will be all workforce.
Yes.
As life's change, it will change. If property ownership changes, it reverts back to the original intent of, and that will be that, if possible, could be on the deed restriction.
I like that idea, since we aren't doing an income thing on it.
Right.
Right.
And
That
don't
helps
forget
keep
too,
it
that
in the-
someone who retires
I
from
like that,
full-time
too.
work might still be participating in the seasonal workforce down here.
Oh,
Like the
yeah,
person
like-
from the Y was
that's right.
talking about and all that.
Mhm.
You know, they might retire from their main career and still be doing something in our economy.
Or volunteering even.
Yeah, right, exactly. Or,
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
Or some of these would be owned by a corporation possibly and rented. Like these, these big units would be all owned by
Well,
somebody and rented
then
out,
that,
right?
they don't get to like, if whatever corporation puts someone in there because they're working here, they're still, the entity's still owning it, that has to stay workforce. When that person retires, they can't stay there. Right?
If it's owned by
If it's
another
owned by-
entity.
I don't know
Right.
how it works.
Yeah.
So I guess
I
we're
mean, because
saying,
they wouldn't, the person living there wouldn't own it, so, you know, they would just be, I would think that their occupancy of the unit would be based on their employment. Once their employment, and it's just like
with the
park housing or whatever, once you retire, you don't get to stay there anymore.
So in my mind, my thought was, Food Lion purchases a unit, and they put 3 people in there.
Right.
If that person no longer works for Food Lion,
They
then they wouldn't be able to take advantage of the unit purchased by Food Lion for Food Lion
Correct,
employees.
I agree.
My concern is at that point, could Food Lion sublet it? So here's and this is weird, and but it's a thought. Could you make, if it is corporate or entity ownership of something, make the rent a lien on their salary? It's a lot, but
Yeah,
what it
no.
does is it ties the occupant to the property.
So I think all of this,
Yeah.
one of the first
It's-
things we
it's-
talked about
it's-
was bringing back language for entities, because we haven't even,
Right, gone
Yeah,
there,
we haven't
yeah.
gotten there yet.
so all of this would have to come back in a
The attorney.
formal document related to, these are the standards for individuals versus these are the standards for entities.
Right.
I just,
I don't think it would be that complicated.
I'm aware that if
Part of your-
corporate
part of
ownership
your
is,
benefits, part
I
of your
think,
salary when you were-
a good possibility and a good option,
You can't let
the
them-
caveats need to be explored. So that's, yeah.
No, I mean, it's great
Oh, Food Line would have you out there
conversation, and
the
hopefully,
minute.
hopefully by
got sick.
next month, we can have something at least in the draft
Yeah.
to get the conversation.
They don't pay them for jury
Sorry to
duty.
make it too weird there.
I found out, I was like. Okay,
So on a good note, we've already handled unit size.
yep. And,
Kind of deed restrictions.
well, yeah, that's gonna be.
So next up
Buffering.
was the buffering, and this is the one where I was telling you, at a minimum, that 10.93.3.2, that states 10-foot wide transitional protective yard with 2 rows of plantings. So we're saying, at a minimum, you're going to have that 10-foot wide, 2 rows of plantings around all 4 sides. Because it's not single, family, or duplex, it's multi. So you're gonna have that buffer. Then beyond that, we have the regulations about interior landscape, parking lot, plantings, and plantings to obscure any type of open foundation wall. We have these other elements that you would wanna keep in there. So, also in the commercial design standards, and this is something we'll bring back to you, I just thought about this, is it talks about high impact uses. And right now, multifamily is not considered a high impact use. So if we were to put multifamily as a high impact use, what that would mean is when it was adjacent to commercial, that 10-foot buffer yard would apply. But if it were adjacent to residential, that buffer yard would bounce up to 25 feet.
And that's only if you put it in high impact?
Wow.
Can I vote for that? I think that's a good idea.
High impact.
So
What
I
else
would
is in
say that, I don't disagree, but that may not be suited for the small.
Right.
Agree. Well, okay, but inherently, yeah, that's fine. High impact use, so
So
you
maybe
could
large
take
should be high impact and not
Nine-bedroom
small.
house a high impact use? Is a 9-bedroom house a high impact use?
It is not. What we can do is bring back what that
Question,
looks
Molly.
like in various scenarios.
That's kind of exactly where my head went on this
Good
as well, but
question.
that's a different conversation.
What did you just say, Kelly?
I just said, we don't have to decide that right now. I
Right.
can bring back next month what multifamily would look like,
Well,
adjacent,
actually,
as high impact versus not high impact.
Well, could small be high impact
How
and
many-
large not be?
how
And
many
the
of
other way
the
around?
lots,
Yes.
how many of the lots that that were brought up were adjacent to residential?
I'll have to run it, but I can.
Because that might weight this
Tell us,
better.
yeah.
If they're all there, then maybe it's a better idea. But if none are, then it isn't.
Residential in use or residential in
retail.
zoning?
Yeah, I said big development, yeah, no, it doesn't.
I would say mostly B, but both, yeah.
So the actual language of the code is both.
Yeah, both.
We still have to be careful.
The 25 kicks in,
Okay.
whether it's developed residentially or within a residential zoning district.
Mhm.
All right,
Okay.
that's something to bring back.
Okay. So then we're on design, architectural design.
I think that kind of depends a lot on whether we're exploring apartment-style
Yeah.
buildings
Yes.
versus townhomes. So that's
Mhm.
something that we can talk more about next month.
Okay. And should we, And then I think the accessory uses, the rest of this stuff I think is pretty good. You don't have it highlighted to discuss. Does anybody have questions or concerns or comments they want to make about building separation? I think that Joe's presentation helped a lot on that. Accessory uses kind of goes without saying. I wouldn't imagine the small ones will obviously have management. Since we're not gonna get all the way through it, should we, well, let's talk a little bit about outdoor amenities.
I just didn't know, if any of y'all read this, did you
I
have
did.
did you have any like, yes, I think we need to do that, yes, I have concerns, just so we know what we can bring back?
I mean, I did, I looked at it, it seems like playgrounds and all, all kinds of different accessibility and everything, it's gonna be really pretty restrictive, right?
Joe has experience with this from Culpeper.
I just don't have a good I don't, see, because living where we live.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the concept of common usable open space was one we brought in the Culpeper. We also had a requirement because we saw proliferation of townhomes that, again, it's a whole different paradigm up there being sort of a satellite to Northern Virginia, commuting and the development pressure there, and also the want for that development.
Right.
So we were encouraging that from a sewer capacity perspective. We wanted that. Anyway, but we required a 3-acre minimum and basically required all the streets to be private. We required sort of this concept of common usable open space, which included, the concept was you can't just design these that has nothing for the residents on site. There were often proffers associated with these developments for schools and fire and police, but still we had limited space for playgrounds, so it was an opportunity from the town side to allow for sort of those needs to be met on site rather than further taxing some of the town amenities. And so we
Right.
would require, you have to provide common usable open space. The 10-foot walkway I like, because instead of the sidewalk requirement being used as the common usable open space, they have to provide a walkable, a walking path or something else that's really for the residents. And it can be hardscape like a walking path, but it's kind of just is I guess aware of that people will be living there, and it's sort of its own community. And once you get past a certain threshold of units, it can sort of offset some of the needs on the town. But given we don't really want very large
Right.
townhome developments here, generally speaking,
And since- how do I say this? We have a fair amount of park and outdoor type space and areas, obviously just with the beach and with the conserved property, Nags Head Woods, all these things that we have already. It's not as if there's nowhere for people to ever go,
But can we create some disparity between the small and the large in
Well,
this?
It seems like that's becoming a common theme with pretty much everything,
Yeah,
huh?
so, small is lower density, large is higher density, higher impact.
More
Higher
people.
impact should leverage toward maybe more, looking at a possibility of amenity requirements.
You said something about when it kind of kicked in based on the size?
Yeah, we had a 3-acre minimum, and then all these things happen.
In everything, 3 acres
Yeah,
and up,
because we
right?
had a lot of, just older homes that were demolished, and then you get 4 townhomes sort of as part of like the urban fabric.
Right. And
That's
so that
fine to an extent.
partly motivated by trying to not to limit the density, to keep some open space and all that, right?
Yeah, and also, to the points of providing amenities, kind of maintaining the urban form, and the fact that, a lot of the sort of single-family homes sort of do maintain, I think, to your point, once it's built and subdivided, then you run into a lot of issues. One person wants to put up their fence in the backyard. It looks good on, like subdivision, and then
Right.
the zoning permits kind of trickle in, and then, people can't really, if you're a middle lot, you're sort of fenced in on either side, there's no side yard or whatever, there's no playground for the kid, and, then like the common space, which is like your parking area and your little front green kind of gets littered, or kids
Right.
put their little pools there or whatever, and then,
Right.
so it's a little more conscientiousness really
Yeah.
improves sort of the actual function of it.
I would agree with you that the larger it gets too, of course, and the more people, then it does tend to lead to some sort of community sense. If people have a place to go where they might meet each other, whatever, where 3 or 4 units, you're gonna kind of know your neighbors.
I'm also seeing, differences, many of these things, small to large, I think there, we could look into, parking as a difference between the two, different standards. Amenities, outside amenities, several of these things, I can see possibilities of it skewing one side, no, yes to the other, looking at differences. Because it's all about density. All of it is about density.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, where in density, actually density versus impact, because it's actually, on the smaller lots, it's higher density, but because its overall impact is much, much higher on the larger lots.
Right.
So,
Okay, well, yeah, let's talk some more about that and think about it.
We'll bring that back.
Okay. So then we're kind of through what we had to get through on that today, you think, Kelly and Joe?
Yeah, that was good.
Got enough
Yeah, I
to,
think
you got enough to do from us?
I mean,
Okay.
it's a large issue. I'd be surprised if you all were in agreement of every aspect and were able to hammer it out in an hour.
Yeah.
It's
Right,
not-
that would be.
doesn't
Well, it's
really-
been quite a few hours, all right. But we're making progress. I feel like we're making progress. Does anybody have anything else they want to say or do before we move on then to to Kelly's staff report?
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, it
Thanks,
was. It's
Joe.
great.
Yeah,
We love the visuals.
I feel like we're further than we were.
that really does help. The visuals really, really do help. It's also, for me, one of the things I do is whenever I come up with a little bit of a nexus where the things are hinging a little bit, the internet, there's a lot of images that do kind of give me, like, okay, so one of the things that Kelly brought up was roof pitch. If you throw roof pitch with dormers, you do have, they could stay within the architectural point, and there is habitable space underneath that roof. It requires much different construction than is normal and maybe as cost effective, but it does create livable space. And as a child, if I could have lived in a triangle room with the window, that would have been that's the happiest thing in the
Imagine
world.
what you would have
Yeah.
been.
So I'm not completely running away from trying to maybe look at architectural points, keeping them up, but making this, it's going to be complicated.
Yeah. Okay, go, Kelly.
I've got nothing
Yeah.
on my report that we haven't already talked about. I just want to give kudos to our event coordinator, Paige Griffin. Our holiday market
Like 1
went
minute.
live. The application process went live at 8 a.m. last Thursday. We had said we could take 50 to 55 vendors, because that's kind of the sweet spot. And less than 5 minutes passed, we saw that we were already at 45 applications in 4 minutes. So our IT person turned it off,
Crushed.
but people still had it open in their cache, filling the application out. It was able to push through. At the end of the day, we got 77 applications.
Wow.
Wow.
And those people got a website pop-up that said, "Thank you for your submission," which leads them to think that they were part of the original 50. So instead of letting anyone down, our holiday markets are now going to be about 70 to 80 vendors.
Wow.
So if you
Oh
see
my gosh.
Paige, just,
Wow.
yeah, give
Wow.
her big kudos. She's got a beast ahead of her. But these are the dates.
Okay.
I saw that on Facebook and lots of the comments and people, and Paige was doing great responding to everything, and that's a
Glad
lot
you
of
let him
work.
through
She's-
instead of.
But
because
Yeah,
people
she
were
is.
just like-
It kind of goes back to that point where, when her position was wasn't there yet, was only part-time. If you build it, what will come, this is great.
It's really cool.
It was wonderful. I do have to say, someone said, X number of applications in 5 minutes. I don't believe that. Someone responded Taylor Swift concert.
I saw that one. That was very, yeah.
That was very common.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That, we are in the zeitgeist.
That's good. We're good. No, it's impressive.
So is that really it from you, Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, unless there's something, we talked about EV.
right, no, we talked about that.
Yeah.
Anybody on the board have something?
I had something weird tossed at me last night on the way in. I was talking to somebody from one of the other towns, and apparently there is a rules change on riparian area because we are in a sandy environment, and they're thinking about, there's a possibility of maybe dumping the 100% riparian area from requirements. Is that, do you know anything about that?
Are you talking about septic for, Jimmy was telling me about this too.
You know, the idea being environmentally, riparian areas typically for areas where you would have an obsolete drain field, but because we're in sand, it's never going to be obsolete. So we shouldn't have 100% riparian area, and what this is going to hinge is that will be more square footage for lot coverage that can be used for other purposes. And should we start to look at that? And then when you get into engineered septic, it all creates more density, more density, more density. So this is this goes back to that weird note that I dropped you, Kelly, a while ago. This is going to create more, and it's starting to become a weird place to live.
I had talked to Jimmy a little bit about that too, and we have a septic health meeting at the end of the month, and I was planning to, we were going to discuss it more, I hoped. I was going to inquire more about it and then come back, and because I was having...
Because in this setting, you know, but this goes to another question. In this setting, oceanfront with perhaps a storm issue where they lose square footage, we're allowing people to build very large houses. If there was an erosive event and they lost something, they wouldn't have the 100% riparian area. So the question is, are we going to move things into a little bit more of a crisis scenario because of a retraction of former code? Because, and I'm not. Maybe overall, it isn't I can see the reasoning for it, but specifically in oceanfront lots, that I do have a concern.
Maybe that's something that we can bring up at our septic health.
That's what I was hoping.
Yeah, I think that's the
Because
way to
I'm
do
not that knowledgeable about it, and
About
Jimmy
this.
had mentioned it, and I thought it would be a great discussion topic, and then we could bring it
Well,
back.
let me, Rob Crawford, I guess, he's one of the newest members?
Yes.
Now, Rob used to work for he worked for the health department as a sanitarian for 20-some years, I would guess.
Yeah.
So this guy is going to be hugely beneficial to the committee, and he can help address, I guess, some of this issue about the repair areas for
Right.
septic systems.
Because I get back to like septic tanks on the beach, which is we're not many years from being there.
Right.
We're only one storm away from being there again. And
Right.
if we lost the 100% repair area, where would those property owners be, and what does that mean? So while it makes sense in code, there are situations where it really could be detrimental.
We'll see what we can find out.
That's-
Yeah, that's
That's
true.
kind of, then that's, yes, you're right. Okay, I hadn't thought of using that word yet.
Yeah,
I know a septic has to be minimum of, 50 feet from mean high water. I mean, if, there will be scenarios where they physically can't get the separation from their septic to mean high water, assuming the Dare County Health Department
Right.
enforces it.
right.
Mhm.
Okay, well, we'll see what we'll continue to keep our ear to the ground on that. Anybody else, members' agenda?
I just want to, maybe possibly down the road, not today, but talk about the overlay district for the hotels, and do we still need that? Do we still want that?
That's
Yeah,
an
we've
excellent
talked about
point.
that.
I would really like to see that map and get the justification for the, I'm ignorant on this
Well, we
stuff.
can initiate.
Yeah, but I think we
initiate
should look at this overlay district because it seems like it's back in your neighborhood, it just seems like it's out of character with the areas that it's potentially going to locate. I'm afraid that it's going to start spreading out a bit. And I think the motive was well thought out, but now we're in a different scenario. And
Right.
I just think that hotel concept is not the best.
Did this something happen the last
Kelly,
2 sessions?
can I ask also, just as a question, you said something, and high density, low density, or those, I'm interested in that definition. If you want to just drop me what that would
You
be.
mean impact?
High impact, I'm
Okay.
sorry, thank you. High impact and low impact, and what the definitions are, because, as I look at a very large house with amenities, maybe that impact should be redefined, because we're starting to get into, outdoor kitchens and
Yeah.
coolers and et cetera, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will send that out. I don't know that it's palatable to consider a residential dwelling.
Well,
High
but,
impact.
okay, so when a residential dwelling has 3 weddings in a week at it, at what point is it no longer a residential dwelling?
Okay, well,
This
Yeah.
has been the conversation.
Exactly.
we're not gonna solve
So, but maybe
No.
that's the, maybe that's an entree for that.
Perhaps.
Okay.
I mean,
okay,
the idea that we have single-family dwellings operating as commercial units is not, I think that's something that, for the 18 years I've been here, we've been trying to tackle that. And I'm not saying that a transitional protective yard isn't gonna make or break it, but it's just a much bigger issue, so I
Right.
think it's a much larger conversation.
Sure.
right.
And it probably requires the county and all the towns and everybody on.
But with the concern that I've heard in candidate forums about density, I'm not sure it's not, it's not relevant. The resonance is there for it right now. There is a degree of a confluence of ideas that density is a big word.
Well, we have survey results coming out too,
Yeah.
so we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep our ear to the ground on it.
One quick thing I did want to mention, and I'm so sorry. Talking about septic and density and things of that nature, it seems quite likely that they're going to drop the gallons per day for bedroom from 120 to 75. So right now, we say that a large single-family dwelling cannot exceed 1,080 gallons per day, which equates to 9 bedrooms. So because we cannot regulate bedrooms, but we can regulate septic capacity, if this legislation goes through, that's shot. So we need to just keep an eye on that.
Yes.
So what did you say the formula is gonna become?
Instead of 120 gallons per day per bedroom,
Mm-hmm,
it's going to be 75.
okay.
So, like I said, we can't say in our ordinance, max 5 bedrooms, max 8 bedrooms.
Right.
But what we can say is, a large single-family dwelling should not exceed 1,080 gallons per day,
Which will regulate
based on the
bedrooms.
120. But if they drop it to 75, that 9 is more like 13 or 14. Y'all know I'm not great at math, but it ups it.
Ups the bedrooms.
Yes.
And this is Dare County?
No, this is state legislation.
State, okay.
So, and
Sounds like it's KDH.
if you take those two things and put them together, tossing the repair area and increasing that, lot coverage can move a lot. That moves the needle a great deal.
So just, I'll keep everybody updated.
And those,
Okay.
those two things are kind of both
Backwards, all right.
in the things that I was thinking about.
I'm confused.
Wonder
Okay,
Where we are with the lawsuit.
Molly, thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Anybody else? And I have nothing for my agenda, so I'll entertain a motion to
Can I
adjourn,
make a motion to
please.
adjourn?
We're adjourned.
You're like, beat everyone on that.